Stop trying to bother them, Jack. They're in the middle of a real conversation. They're talking about things a tiny brain like yours could never understand.
Hey guys, MangaKamen here. Since I wrapped up the Yugioh 5d's character analysis videos for the signers, I figured since there's going to be a small lull in content, now would be a good time for a compilation video. A few of the videos in here are about a year or so older at this point, and I want to focus on some big content coming in August, so I hope you enjoy this compilation. I do want to do a big Yugioh 5d's retrospective in September, and if that sounds like something you'd like to see from me, please consider leaving a like and a comment. And be sure to check out my Patreon and YouTube memberships. I'm planning on making some original content for those who support me on those services. At least time-sensitive stuff, and it helps me and the channel out. Okay, it's probably been a good 45 seconds now, so I can say this. If you enjoyed my video and content, please type in the comments, "Fuck you, Crow!" But enough of that, let's rev up the engines and talk about some Yu-Gi-Oh characters.
Who's the one master of faster? Who rules the duels? That's right, it's me! Let's get this straight. It's not the power of the runner. It's the rider. I'll take on anyone on any ride and I'll still be victorious. Any more questions?
So, rivals. Aside from villains, rivals have been a staple in this channel's success in the last few years. Characters like Jetstream Sam,
Mind if I got in?
or the Pokemon rivals, they tend to be some of the more entertaining aspects of writing to me. And hey, with me slowly getting more and more to anime coverage, I figured we'd take the time and mesh the two topics together. I'm sure people are already willing to jump on me and point to my video on Seto Kaiba, and don't get me wrong, Seto Kaiba will definitely be the go-to character for rivals for me. He's probably one of the most iconic rivals in fiction.
Well, only if destroying an innocent soul concerns you.
Nah. As the president of a major corporation, I have to do that every day.
Though I have to say, part of the reason why I'm so conflicted with Kaiba as a character is due to the various adaptations that the character had to go through. To get you up to speed quickly, there are about two distinct versions of Kaiba. The manga, and of course, the anime version. When you talk about the anime, you also have to talk about the original Japanese and the English dub versions, which do make the character really different. Each version has their own strengths and weaknesses, and while I'm a bit more lenient with the English dub version of Kaiba, I chalk that up to Eric Stewart's performance, as well as how mutable Kaiba has become as a character.
Cause I figure, if there is intelligent life out there, then let's teach them how to duel.
Also, what helps is that I grew up with the dub, so I have a special place in my cold, dark, rock-hard heart. Though as an adult, now with a finer taste of literature, writing tropes, yet still spends a good amount of his time on entertainment money on pieces of cardboard that have dragons, waifus, and sometimes having a combination of the two, take that as you will. I'm not complaining. In this day and age, dragon girls in maid outfits are probably pretty low on the creep factor on the internet. But you didn't come here to talk to me about that. Rather, you came here to watch some guy talk about Jack Atlas and how he's the greatest rival in anime. And I'm sure there's already a flood of comments telling me that there's another character who deserves that moniker. And to that I say, bring it on! Regardless, this is Jack Atlas, anime's greatest rival. Spoilers for Yu-Gi-Oh 5d's.
I only lay a hand on a woman if she lays hers on a child.
To make this part simple, Jack Atlas is the rival character in the third iteration of the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, Yu-Gi-Oh 5d's. He's also the character who arguably kicks off the plot of the story. This is normally the part of the video where we'll talk about the design of Jack Atlas, which on a personal level I think is probably one of the strongest designs for a rival in Yu-Gi-Oh! However, the only thing I can really find is that the wikis like to claim that Jack's design was created by Shuji Maruyama, who was a Japanese animation director. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for that to be true, but when there's a citation needed on the wiki, I tend to raise my eyebrow in skepticism. Maximum skepticism! I do tend to believe that this is the case because Kazuki Takahashi, God bless his soul, was reported to become more and more hands-off with the Yu-Gi-Oh property as time went on. Of course, I wish there'd be a lot more credible information about the development of the characters, especially when it comes to design. Hell, when you talk about the main character of the series, Yusei Fudo, there's actually a couple of fun facts about his hair. It was one based on Takahashi's own bedhead, apparently, and was supposed to be a complete of rock, paper, scissors theme that was shared with the previous two protagonists. I can see rock with Judai, but paper with Yugi? I mean, I don't really see it. I'm more for the water creature-based inspiration. Yugi has a starfish, Judai has a jellyfish, and Yusei looks like an emperor penguin.
You just don't understand the beauty of the penguin. I love penguins.
I do really like Jack Atlas's design. It's got a good blend of both over-the-top elements and at the same time has grounded elements too. You have to remember that Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's is set in a more dystopian future where there's a much more obvious class difference, with a focus on the sport of duel monsters, which became intertwined with racing in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. Jack's threads had this amazing detail where it comes off as a futuristic king, and his hair having the spikes that look like that of a crown. This was a man destined to be king of the dueling world. Or, at least that's what you think. Here's the thing about Jack Atlas. He's what you'd call satellite scum. To give context, in the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, after the incident called Zero's Reverse, Domino City was split into two separate entities, Neo Domino City and the Satellite. Zero Reverse was the cataclysmic event that caused a tectonic shift that split the city in two, with Neo Domino City filled with the cream of the crop in the tops, where you got the prim and proper, fancy rich folks. Meanwhile, you got Satellite, which is essentially a junkyard where people live and work in factories, sorting through the garbage that the tops give them just so they can make ends meet. A lot of the people in Satellite are also criminals. It's why when you watch the show and you see some people with yellow markers on their face, those are criminal marks. And if the name didn't give it away, it's the mark of people who committed crimes, and as such, anyone with one of those is sentenced to live in Satellite to serve their time. Anyone who's thought to be from Satellite in that regard is considered to be a criminal, even if they don't have a mark. So what does this have to do with Jack Atlas? Well, he was born and raised in Satellite. His parents were killed during the Zero Reverse incident. Thus, he was an orphan raised in a location that was essentially the slums, had no actual family, and frankly speaking, doesn't have a lot of skills to his name other than playing a card game. A card game that has a big tie to the economy of the world, but still a card game. Jack wasn't alone though. Eventually he became friends with Yusei Fudo and Crow. And then later on, the three met up with Kiryu, where the four became Team Satisfaction, a dueling gang that would face against other gangs in Satellite, essentially taking over the territories throughout the ruined city. This kept going until Kiryu decided to take things a bit too far, forcing a kid from another gang to duel against him. And then, for some reason, Kiryu assaulted the kid afterwards. Jack and Crow left Team Satisfaction, and soon after, Yusei left as well. You see, Kiryu wanted to take on Sector Security, the police of Neo Domino and Satellite. And, well... It's because of these events that essentially created a divide between Jack, Yusei, and Crow. Kiryu was someone that the characters themselves described saved them. Hell, they essentially became a makeshift family of sorts. But when Kiryu went off the deep end, even killing people in the process, it caused a rift.
Look, Pim, I know it's our job to help this guy and everything, but I think this guy's a lost cause. He's obviously made up his mind. Why don't we just cut our losses and get out of here?
Now, I go through all this to explain Jack's past, or at least a good chunk of it, because it helps explain a connection between him and Yusei, even before the actual events of the show take place. If you've seen any of my videos talking about rivals in one media, one of the most important aspects is to have a connection with the main character. The connection can be something as simple as childhood friends, or similar goals, or even a familiar connection. But personally, I find having a past that the main character and rivals share is probably the strongest way to establish that connection, especially if they go through the same events and have taken different roads. After the Team Satisfaction breakup, Jack essentially became a lone wolf, a man who wanted to become king of the world. It makes sense. Ever since he was a kid, Jack basically had nothing, and even when he made friends, one of them betrayed him. The path of the king is one of loneliness. And it's contrasted very well against Yusei, because Yusei valued the bonds he had with his friends and was content with his life in Satellite. Of course, there's a very good reason why these two former friends became rivals, or even enemies at one point.
Nothing can stand up to my unstoppable force, not even an immovable object, and I will prove it to you in a duel.
There's a lot you can go about creating a rivalry, and it can easily make the rival character hated by the audience, which is something you kinda want to do, at least at the beginning of a story. You'd also have to have a reason for why the main character would want to face off against the rival. Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's does a really good job of this, since the inciting incident of the entire story is Jack Atlas stealing not only Yusei's D-Wheel, but also Stardust Dragon, Yusei's prized card. They were essentially the passports that Jack would need in order to get to Neo Domino City and assume a new life, along with his own card, Red Dragon Archfiend. That alone would be enough of a cause for the rivalry, especially since Jack Atlas was essentially tempted by one of the major antagonists of the series, Rex Godwin and his lackey Jaeger, to do this. But it was how Jack had stolen Yusei's prized card and D-Wheel that really cemented him as a rival to really go after. We wouldn't learn this until episode 25 in the anime, but as it turns out, Jack had taken advantage of a mutual friend of his in Yusei, Rally, using the young kid as a hostage and putting his life in danger by tying him up in a boat, setting him off to sea, and having Yusei go out to swim to save Rally. Now this is scummy, like really scummy, but there's a line I want to point out.
お前には本当のことを告げておく。俺がやった。俺にシティから誘いが来た。シティへの切符は俺の持つレッドデーモンズとお前のスターダスト。
何？
お前が2枚のカードを揃え、シティへ行くという手もある。どうする？
I'm going to tell you the truth. I did it. I got an invitation from the city. My tickets are Red Daemons and your Stardust. There's also the option of you collecting both cards and going to the city. This is something odd. Jack could have easily just lied to Yusei's face about this. He knows that Yusei won't abandon his friends, and could have easily just disappeared to Neo Domino City without Yusei knowing what Jack had done until Jack was already long gone. But Jack didn't. He straight up told Yusei what he did. He still stole Yusei's stuff and put Rally's life in danger, and already lied to Yusei in order to bait him out to the docks, but why tell the truth now? This could be me reading way too much into this old anime, but Jack isn't a full-on monster.
君、もうジョジョとキスはしたのかい？まだだよな。初めての相手はジョジョではない。
このジャック・アトラスだ！
Considering the world he grew up in, where the weak are essentially seen as trash, it makes sense that Jack would want to get out of the destitute that is Satellite. In fact, when you really consider the events of Yusei confronting Jack after the king establishes himself in Neo Domino, Jack returns Yusei's Stardust Dragon when they first meet up. Jack accepts Yusei's challenge, and when Rex Godwin takes Yusei's friends hostage, it's Jack that demands that they be released.
I duel for me. Goodwin has got his own agenda.
Jack is a jackass, no doubt about that.
I mean, if it weren't for Jack double-crossing Yus and stealing his ride, Yus would have been given that interview. Because Jack got all famous with Yus's runner, all the fame, fortune, and glory of Jack's now.
But he does have a form of chivalry. He's what you'd call a pragmatic hero. Jack is willing to do things that are more of characteristics of a villain than a hero, but they have standards if it helps them with a cause. And Jack's cause of becoming a real king and getting out of the slums is to him an adequate reason to turn on his friends, or even threaten the life of a little kid. He's not a great person, obviously, but this does add layers to his character, and even more so when you realize that his status as the king of duelists is nothing more than a false title. Jack was used as a prop by Rex Godwin, and was mostly to draw out the rest of the signers. For the sake of brevity, I won't go too in-depth about the signers in this video, but they're mostly just a group of chosen people who were given marks of the Crimson Dragon, who were there to save the world from darkness, with the power of a deity called the Crimson Dragon. Jack and Yusei are both signers, so that adds to the rivalry between the two. One thing to note about the personal moral compass, even though their duel was interrupted at the time, when Jack and Yusei duked it out at the beginning of the series, it came to light that Jack would have lost to Yusei had the duel continued. To Jack, that's the same as losing. Even if the public would never find out about the loss, Jack would know, and he actually gets upset about this, to the point where he seeks out Yusei. Jack wants a rematch in order to prove that he is the king of the writing duelists, and even returns Yusei's Stardust Dragon so he could fight Yusei at full strength. It sort of reminds me of a Black Knight, where he's willing to dirty his hands with nasty deeds to get what he wants, but he still has a code of sorts. With how the anime has to be anime though, Jack does lose to Yusei, and when he does, the city essentially just throws him away, and it even comes out that he was from the satellite, which makes his reputation tarnish faster. And I think this is what really makes Jack to be a great rival in that regard. Since he was propped up to be a powerful enemy, he was the last person that Yusei had to duel in the Fortune Cup. We're also shown that Jack has a huge ego. He was propped up to be a very powerful duelist. Throw in the fact that he did betray Yusei and his friends in Satellite, it makes it satisfying to watch Jack lose in a duel against Yusei. There was a proper setup for Jack as a rival that you want to see beaten, but it also shows that you can understand where he's coming from with the goal of wanting to be the king of the dueling world, especially when Jack was given the worst hand when he was born. What this does is make the character an actual person, and that's one of the best things you can do with a rival character, and that's to make them their own character and motivations aside from the main character. And here's the thing, the rivalry between Yusei and Jack is one that feels a lot more natural than the two just wanting to compete for the title of king. Hell, Yusei doesn't even care about the title when he takes it from Jack. He's doing what he's doing for his friends, and funnily enough, even though Yusei's friends aren't in danger anymore, Yusei continues on with the match against Jack. I like to think to myself that Yusei wanted to help Jack as well, since he was also Yusei's friend once. I mean, what's stopping Yusei from beating up Jack? Man clearly perfected the Shoryuken technique. In my mind, I like to think that hearing that Godwin was willing to use Jack to get Yusei to come to Neo Domino City, that prompted Yusei to want to save his old friend. Hell, even after everything that Jack did, and including putting people in danger with their duel that summoned the Crimson Dragon, Yusei still runs to Jack after their duel to see if he's okay. Jack, having crashed his D-wheel and obviously injured, Yusei runs to his rival.
大丈夫か、ジャック。
バカな。キングである俺が再び敗れるなど。
お前が同じ戦術で決着をつけようとすることは読めていた。キングであろうとするプライドにお前は負けたんだ。
キングゆえの敗北か。
I think that says a lot about these characters, and not what they're directly saying, which is part of the charm of the scenes, and how you can read more into the characters based on what they do and not just what they say. But after this whole thing with how Jack has been defeated, where do you go with the character, especially as a rival?
I have no idea! Yusei! That guy stole your Stardust Dragon card! What a dick! I know I did it in Season 1, but, he's a dick!
After his defeat, Jack goes through this thing called character development. I know these are scary words, especially in today's online space where character development seems to be taboo with modern writers and reviewers. But in all honesty, as someone who qualifies as one of those essayists, my simple response is, shut up. The thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's is that while we do enjoy the series,
I hope he's okay. He seemed so upset when he left.
He's just playing up the drama like the man-child he is. But he's our man-child, so let's go find him.
the thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's is that while I do enjoy the series, I have to admit, after the Fortune Cup arc and going to the Dark Signer arc,
I'm out of here. If the world's gonna end, I might as well spend my last few days cruising round on my runner.
there is quite a change of direction for the series. And for the arcs after that...
What's with this hole in my shirt? What? You said get rid of the stain, and that's exactly what I did.
I could spend hours talking about the issues with Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's second half, provided, of course, I was given enough time, money, and rope.
I'm gonna pretend that made sense.
But even as a YouTuber, I have to have some level of dignity, and I'm making a video talking about a character from an anime that's well over a decade ago at this point. Do you get it yet? I'm old! Now, before I start having an existential crisis about how I screwed up my life with this career choice, Jack Atlas actually managed to do something with his life after getting his ass handed to him in a card game. He got a girlfriend! Well, I say that, but it's not exactly the traditional relationship. Meet Carly, one of the newer characters being introduced into Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's after the Fortune Cup.
Great, fortune teller Sui, that's perfect. This means I'm gonna have bad luck all day. That's just great. Might as well just go crawl in a hole.
A journalist who has a bit of a bad luck streak. Carly is supposed to be an important character. Hell, right at the beginning of this arc, she's given a lot of focus, which is kind of weird since she doesn't have any actual connections with the currently established characters. Hell, even Crow gets introduced about this time and gets some focus. bastard.
Hiya, Crow.
Hi.
So what's with this character? As I alluded to before, Carly is a journalist, and managed to get a bit of a scoop, investigating the signer marks on Yusei and Jack, by dressing up as a nurse, breaking into Jack's hospital, and after dealing with a possessed security officer, dragged Jack back to her place, where he essentially became a mooch. To be frank, Jack doesn't really have any actual feelings or connections with Carly at this point, even after she did take a hit from him in a duel against the possessed security member. It's actually pretty in character for Jack. The guy essentially lost his throne, and a lot of what conveyed about Jack's mindset is actually stated by assumption by Carly herself during this time. We don't actually get to hear what Jack's feelings are for a while about him losing his crown. It's Carly who narrates it and makes assumptions. Then again, this is the girl who was essentially blackmailing Jack into going to the amusement park by threatening to tell the public that he didn't even know how the monorail works. I'm grateful to know that Jack Atlas has the ability to warp gravity with his hair. How else would his hat of disguise not fly off when he's bungee jumping? There's actually a reason for this whole thing. Jack was trying to reminisce about his past actions, and we learn Jack's actual thoughts on his loss, and how he's reflecting on his choices of becoming what is essentially a false king. Or as Jack puts it, a clown who lies about his identity. He had to lose everything to realize that his path he chose wasn't the right one. And Carly actually helps him through this. After all, the old Jack essentially died in that duel against Yusei, and now the real one can take the stage. It's not so much as an actual relationship, but it's clear Carly did help Jack in some way to help him realize that his false title of king was holding him back. So there's a connection built there and allows Jack to grow as a person. This sort of thing is great for rival characters because it adds more to them as a character and that they're not just built upon their rivalry with the main C. Frankly speaking, while I know that I'll probably get shot, one of the things I don't really like about rivals in, say, the Pokemon franchise is that a good chunk of them tend to be one note without any actual things going on in their lives outside of being the best.
I'm up here and you're down there. I'm above you.
Stop it!
I'm standing.
I wish I was standing.
Yeah, you do.
I know that's a little unfair to compare an adult rival like Jack Atlas, who was essentially a teenager with attitude, but since Pokemon is everyone's punching bag since that godforsaken bootleg with guns came out, this seems like fair game. Don't get me wrong, rivals should have a connection to each other and they should fight against each other in different ways. But one thing you need to understand is before they are rivals, they need to be characters. It's why when Yusei is going through a bit of a mental crisis over the fact that Kiryu returned to get revenge, Yusei is having to confront a terrible time of his past. Jack actually does the one thing that any good rival should do: beat the ever-living shit out of Yusei.
俺はどうすれば
どうすればだと教えてやる
I'm half joking here because this is what the show literally does.
そんな捨てられた飼い犬のような目をしているから桐生に敗北したんだ。俺は貴様が憎い。この俺をキングの座から引きずり下ろし屈辱を与えてくれた貴様があの時の不動優勢はどこへ消えた。死んだのは桐生じゃない。
Jack understands that as signers, they have to fight, regardless of who it is. Whether it be someone from the past, someone they have hurt, and they have to fight them. Rivals also have the ability to push each other to new heights, and even build each other up. And while the two do a cross counter, Jack can see the spark of a duelist in Yusei again. Is it corny as all hell? You're goddamn right it is, and that's why it's so awesome! Yusei did help Jack open his eyes to why he lost, and Jack returned the favor, just with a few bruises to go with it. There are other things I could go on about with Jack's characterization, especially with a certain character.
サテライトの仲間や大切なものを守るためには覚悟を決めなければならない。
ふん、相変わらず仲間だの、守るべきものだのと。俺の守るべきもの。
Yeah, one thing I kind of skipped over was that, well, Carly kind of dies? And while it does go more into Jack as a character, it ultimately doesn't matter since the second half of 5d's pretty much hits the reset button on this whole thing, which sucks because there was a bit of a relationship to be had between Jack and Carly, especially considering she became what the series called a dark signer. Which, you know, as much as I would love to complain about that, there are bigger issues with Jack.
With Jack Atlas in the driver's seat, what could possibly go wrong?
Jack, lay off the accelerator!
Accelerate more? Okay!
Not only as a rival, but also a character that we need to dive into, especially since I really like what they did with him during the Dark Signer arc.
It is with great honor that I welcome you all to my home. I'm here to serve you.
Right, the only thing you've ever served is a tennis ball.
But alas, here we go. Much like the second half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, I have a lot of mixed feelings on what they did with Jack in the second half. In the Dark Signer arc, while Jack was obviously still Yusei's rival, he acted more like an actual person who did care for people. There's the obvious Carly, who when Jack thought had straight up died before being revived as a Dark Signer, thought she died because of him. Jack actually does some heroic moments in this as well. Aside from going into a crumbling building to save another predominant character, Aki Izayoi, in probably one of the most badass ways possible, using his D-wheel to go upstairs. This is also the scene where he learns that Carly essentially died, but that's beside the point. This trend of Jack being a bit of a heroic character is also brought up in the second half of the series. One of the more blanket examples I can recall is Jack getting involved with a predatory loan shark, and ended with Jack dueling him to get the contracts that he had and rip them up, with the looming threat of Jack losing his Red Damon's dragon and D-Wheel if he lost the duel. It's an interesting way for the character to evolve, but it also comes with some unnecessary baggage that I'm two minds of. If you've been on the channel for a while and have seen where I've talked about Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's in previous videos, you'll know that I have a big issue with the second half of the series. It's mostly because 5d's goes through an identity crisis, especially since it has a tournament arc that wrapped up a good chunk of its episodes, and also filled up with filler that doesn't really contribute to the plot. And in some cases, it also makes the characters a little less savory in my opinion. I've talked about at length of how the writers of 5d's had some really good stuff going on with the leading lady of the series, Aki. I made an entire video about her. But since we're focusing on Jack for this video, let's stick with him. In the very same episode I talked about a little bit ago with the loan shark, we had a montage where Jack gets fired from various jobs because he's apparently incompetent at everything except dueling and riding motorcycles.
Look, is Jack Atlas not the finest sushi chef in the land?
Obviously, this is a joke, and while I've gone on the past to make fun of characters who do stupid things, if it's done well, it can expand upon the character. I personally like this little part of Jack. Everyone has flaws, and it makes sense that the guy wouldn't have a lot of formal education or social skills, so him getting fired from jobs makes sense. Kinda sad for a 19-year-old, but I'm a YouTuber, so I can't really judge in that regard.
You say he's not destined for anything but minimum wage.
I do appreciate this sort of thing for a rival character as it works for humanization, but 5d's is a bit of an overcorrection here, especially when it comes to Jack. There's a small series of episodes where there's an imposter Jack Atlas. He's going around beating duelists and even has a fake Red Dragon's Archfiend. 3 actually. Obviously, Jack Atlas is accused of attacking people, since not only does the fake have a replica of Jack's Ace's card, but his also face and D-Wheel. At one point, Jack does get arrested for the fake's crimes, but it's broken out by said fake in order to take him out. This is actually a pretty sweet plot idea, especially when it's a doppelganger duel going on, and it has Jack essentially confronting himself. And it's actually his past self, since the fake Jack acts like the original Jack that we know about.
Don't you get it? Nothing you do will ever work against me because you're of a lesser intellect, so you don't stand a chance.
Which, hey, sounds pretty awesome if you ask me. The fake Jack even steals Jack's legitimately awesome theme when he summons his false Red Damon's dragon. The problem is that there's a focus on a new card, Trust Guardian. There's a bit of talk throughout the 2 episodes where Jack tends to play a bit too offensively, and since the WGRP, the tournament I mentioned earlier, is one where teams of 3 need to work together, Jack's style doesn't really fit a team method. Which doesn't make a lot of sense, since Jack did have a lot of defensive cards, especially for his synchro monsters in the show. Hell, he had one of the earliest defensive hand traps ever made, Battle Fader. It's not actually that bad, but it's something that makes me raise my eyebrow. Then we get something pretty amazing. and it's something akin to that of a rival. Later in the season, Yusei gets a new monster, Shooting Star Dragon, an upgrade for his own monster, Stardust Dragon. Well, like any good rival, Jack gets an upgrade too, and to be frank, it's probably one of the most badass ways to get an upgrade. Jack basically has to fight the avatar of an evil god, the Crimson Devil. The familiar of the Crimson Devil was going to offer Jack as a sacrifice to revive his master, and even managed to awaken the god to take Jack's body. But you know what Jack Atlas did? Jack managed to utilize his own burning soul, warping the Crimson Devil and turning it into a new monster for Jack to use, an upgrade of Red Dragon Archfiend, Red Nova Dragon. This is sweet, especially when you realize that the familiar was trying to trap Jack by using other characters to prod Jack into the tomb of the Crimson Devil. So Jack just turns the tables and possesses the Crimson Devil. This is what makes Jack an amazing rival, since he had to rise up to the occasion and find his own way to become stronger, just like Yusei did. However, most people who are familiar with this know there's a major problem. If you were one of the poor saps who only watched the English dub of the show, well, the episodes where Jack had gotten this incredibly important card, as well as the trials he had to go through, were cut!
And now history and the future are safe forever.
Yes! Episodes 111 and 123 were cut from the dub, and even the final arc for the series was cut as well. I can't say for sure what the cause was for this, but from what I understand, there were a few issues. There were low ratings, there was the push to have Zexal air faster, and an ongoing lawsuit from TV Tokyo seemed to be the main causes for the series to end at episode 136, even though there were a grand total of 154 episodes. But that's only for the final arc, as well as the final duel between Jack and Yusei. I'd argue that cutting out these large parts of the show for one region is a bit of a crime, even if I do have issues with the dub. This especially hurts because while there are issues with the last part of 5d's, how the show ends is actually a pretty fitting and works really well for the final duel between rivals of the show. While I won't go into detail about the final duel against the major antagonist, the actual final duel of the series is one I feel is actually pretty important. Not just to illustrate why Jack is a great rival, but also to tie into the development of him and Yusei. To give some context, after beating the bad guys and saying Neo Domino City, life has gotten better for everyone. Yusei is a scientist, Aki's currently studying, Crow became the man, and etc. But there's someone missing, and that's Jack Atlas. We'll get back to him in a second, but there's a bit of a theme going on with the cast. There are new opportunities and the uncertain future is looming over them. However, those opportunities would force them all to break up, and one of the overlying themes of the entire series is bonds. These characters cherish the bonds they made with each other, and as such, opportunities like studying abroad or becoming a part of an overseas dueling league are being questioned. It's understandable since this group did help each other out a lot, and grew as people, and growing closer at the same time. Even Yusei questions what he should do. He managed to accomplish a goal as a scientist, and received offers as well. The only member of this group who's steadfast in their decision to leave is Jack.
俺たちの絆はどうなっちまうんだよ。そうやっていつまでも絆にしがみつくのか。己の力を世界に向けて試してみたいとは思わんのか。ユウセイ、お前にも当然誘いは来ているだろう。ああ。
The man's been training, facing off against powerful duelists, and after everything, he knows what he wants to do. He knows he can't accomplish if he stays in Neo Domino City, and thus, Yusei challenges Jack. Dueling was what guided these people in the past, and it'll help them decide what they want in the future. And it's something that Jack wants. In order to become the king of the dueling world, the real king, he needs to get out of Yusei's shadow and defeat the one man who managed to defeat him, one-on-one. I need to point out that this is the only time these two dueled against each other since the Fortune Cup, and it's a very entertaining duel, the two going all out and bringing out the original aces in the first turn. It's a duel where Yusei isn't sure about his future, meanwhile Jack knows what he wants to do. It's something that you need to understand that rivals, at least the kind that Jack and Yusei are, push each other and help each other. Even if they beat the living crap out of each other in the process, their intentions are meant to be positive for each other. For each fight they have, they get stronger. And when these two are at their peak in the series, the fact they challenge each other with one of them set in their future and the other searching for what they want to do, because it gets to the point where Jack pushes Yusei to make a risky move.
お前のフィールドはガラ空きとなる。俺はハイアンドローの3回目の効果を使う。 ここで攻撃力が800より高いモンスターを引いたら自滅だぞ。
A move that if he screws up would leave Yusei defenseless against Jack's most powerful monster, putting trust not only his skills but the future that he'll choose, and by putting faith into that, Yusei was able to defeat Jack's ace. With the field set and Yusei finding his road, Yusei does the one thing he can with an opponent who's pushed him to his limits: summon his first ace. Junk Warrior. It was because of this fight with Jack that Yusei managed to find what truly mattered to him. There's even an amazing callback to the first opening of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, with Red Damon's dragon clashing against Junk Warrior. The duel with Jack not only showed Yusei but all their friends that even though they may be miles away, the bonds they've made with each other will not break at easily. And that's what a great rival does. A great rival challenges the MC and forces the main character to grow and make hard decisions. Both the MC and the rival force each other to become better people, to become better at what they do and to find their own paths when they're lost. And sometimes that rivalry can inspire others. That's what makes a great rival.
に響いたぞ、ユーセイ。どうやらここに戻る理由ができたな。
いつでも戻ってこいよ。俺は待ってる。
次は負けんぞ。
また全力を尽くそう。
I honestly do love Jack Atlas as a character. He's probably one of the better characters in the entire Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, and I say that not just because he has a range of characteristics that make him stand out as a person, but it's also due to the fact that as a rival, he's probably one of the best in anime. He has a clear goal in mind, has shown to do whatever it takes to achieve that goal, and has actually shown that he will hurt his friends to accomplish that. But when he lost the crown he sought for so long, Jack strove to become a better king, an actual king. One where he didn't have to step on his friends in order to acquire that crown, and in the process managed to retain the bonds that he had once lost and make new ones with the rest of Team 5d's. Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's is probably one of my favorite iterations of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, and sure, there are a lot of issues I take with the series, that's for sure. But Jack as a character will never be one of the reasons why I dislike the show. I can dislike the writing and direction they took with him, but not the character himself. It's why over a decade later I still go back and watch 5d's, most of the episodes around Jack Atlas because he's that good of a character to me. And hey, even though Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 brought back Jack Atlas as a completely different character with no actual past, how they wrote the character actually feels like a continuation for the development that Jack got in his original series. It's even shown in Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend, where you can see the inspiration from Junk Warrior punching the original dragon in the final episode. However, it's hollow, because this is a different Jack. And part of the reason why Jack Atlas may seem like a good rival is because I condensed a lot of the parts of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. If you recall, I talked about the WRGP. It's a team tournament, and while Jack and Crow did get their own moments, and Aki as well, most of the time they were just being used as stepping stones for Yusei to take the win in almost every match they had. It's how the tournament was set up, and I have a real big issue with that. It essentially made it so Yusei would be scoring the last hit no matter what. I can make an entire video talking about the issues of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, and hey, I've done that with Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, so I may do that sometime, but I do hope that you guys can see what I see with Jack Atlas. Now, if you guys enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like, and if you got to this point in the video, leave in the comments down below, Absolute Power Force. Helps the video out, and hey, if we get 5k likes on the video, I'll absolutely talk about the flaws of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. But for now, I'm MangaKamen, thanks for watching, and remember, my friends, the king lives forever.
Yeah, well, you found Crow, and you're not going anywhere until we turbo duel.
For a long time on the channel, we've always been talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! And sometimes, whenever I get the chance, if some certain character would appear in my videos or tangentially be mentioned, I wouldn't hesitate to spit his name out with a large amount of vitriol along with it. And that character would be, my friends, Crow Goddamn Hogan from Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. Every time I would bring this character up, I would get flooded with comments as to why I detested this character, especially since the guy tends to be a very popular one online. He runs a deck that is a fan favorite in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Everyone loves Blackwings.
That's a lie!
He constantly gets support in it.
We have enough Blackwings this—
and was one of the few characters to be brought back in a later series of Yu-Gi-Oh! Crow Hogan is supposedly a popular character, so why don't I like him? Well, the detectives in my audience should have a few clues to that, as I've alluded in my reasons for disliking Crow as a character and narratively in my Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's videos rather blatantly. But my dislike for Crow runs deeper than that, and it's not just because the dub makes him out to be dumber than a sack of hammers.
3? If you're so worried about Yusei, why don't you go look for it?
I would, but Clucker's deep fried chicken doesn't deliver itself. I'm on the clock.
Man, these yahoos. I'm sure Yusei's okay. So he didn't call Crow back. No big deal.
Well, actually, it's not just that. I also got this really weird message at the garage.
Your friend Yusei Fudo has been taken. I thought you should know.
What? Why are you just now telling us this?
I didn't want to freak anyone out.
Crow Hogan, I dubbed thee the dumbest character in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's for that line alone. But before I devolve this video into justified Crow slander, I should actually explain my issues with the character after I dispel something. I'm MangaKamen, and this is Crow Hogan, Yu-Gi-Oh!'s worst character of all time. Spoilers for Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's.
Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's!
When talking about Crow Hogan, and to the greater extent the writing choices of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's past episode 30, there are two prominent rumors that are relevant to this discussion. There's normally a third one, but the one involving the Japanese voice actress for a character named Carly joining a cult has been debunked a long time ago and isn't really relevant to today's video. No, we're talking about the two rumors that are: 1. Crow was meant to be a dark signer, but that was changed because Blackwings became popular, and 2. The Japanese voice actress for Aki Izayoi became pregnant, and as such she had to step away for a while, and thus, not only her character, but also the writing for Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's had to be changed. The second one is relatively easy to disprove, since all we need to do is look towards dates. Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's came out in 2009 and ended in 2012. There's an article on Anime News Network which came out in 2014, which the voice actress for Aki announced her pregnancy, so we're able to instantly throw that rumor in the trash. As for the first one, that doesn't match up with the timelines, and how anime production and card production doesn't work. Anime does not work in the same vein as something like South Park.
You know, more mature looking. Something that a woman I haven't seen in a while would think, this guy's really virile, but also nurturing and supportive. Something like that. That's what I'm looking for.
That does not count! Now you may be wondering why I'm bringing this up. There are a few reasons for me to point these out. The first is to dispel any misinformation out there. Even a show that is well over a decade old, sometimes when I see a discussion, these rumors will be brought up, and oftentimes will be used as a defense for some of the poor writing choices in the second half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. I made no secret in my videos when I talk about this series of Yu-Gi-Oh! That I believe that the second half featuring the WRGP arc for Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's was at best handled messedly, and at worst was probably some of the worst writing that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has had to date due to how it was set up. Even when I brought up that I was going to do this video about Crow, I had a few people ask me if I was going to talk about how the initial plan was to make Crow the antagonist of the first season, and how some people even online believe that he was supposed to be the leader of the Dark Signers, the major antagonists for the first half of 5d's. Frankly speaking, I don't know how you could even do that. It makes no bloody sense, especially with the backstory that we're given for the character. I've always been a firm believer of being honest in critique, and though I may have a very apparent dislike of Crow, that doesn't mean I should use misinformation to illustrate my points or justify my dislike for a character. Now, you can dislike a character, story, piece of media, or whatever for any reason. Character doesn't look good, you find the story to be annoying, you think people online overhype it. But even back in the days of being a commentator who would respond to other critics' videos, I've never been a fan of basing distaste on misunderstanding or misinformation. And that's part of the reason why I'm even making this video in the first place. I think anyone who knows that when I say, "Fuck you, Crow," it's obviously done in a hyperbolic state. And while I certainly don't like the character, he's fictional. He's not real.
Then you won't mind me telling you that once I win this duel, I plan to turn Kaiba Corp into a company that specializes in children's trading cards. It already does that. For actual children.
How dare you, Pegasus!
And as a critic who's been on YouTube for well over a decade, I feel that it's important for me to express myself on things that I feel are poorly done in a calm-headed manner. Still, fuck you, Crow! But now we must go, why? Fuck you, Crow. Well, let's start at the beginning, shall we? We're first introduced to Crow Hogan rather late into the series, especially for a character who's supposed to be a part of the main cast. At episode 30, we're finally introduced to him, who is the front and center of the episode. To point something out, the last major character for the main cast was introduced in episode 14. That was Aki. That is quite the gap right there. Now, that's not me harping on the late introduction. Prominent characters all the time are introduced at different times and rates, and my complaint isn't so much on the lateness of the aspect. Rather, this just opens up so many questions about Crow and how he just inexplicably gets shoved into the plot. To make a long story short about some context you need, the beginning part of 5d's focuses on the main character Yusei trying to get out of the slums known as Satellite, aiming to get back his first D-Wheel and his treasured card, Stardust Dragon, from the rival of the series, Jack Atlas, who had stolen them 2 years prior to the events of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. In the case of Crow, we're told that he has a connection to both Yusei and Jack, with all three of them having grown up in Satellite, all three of them being part of Team Satisfaction, a gang of duelists set on taking over the territory of Satellite, and in particular, Crow being such good friends with Yusei. So that begs the question, where the fuck was Crow during all this? It's a genuine question that doesn't really get answered, especially if he was such good friends with Yusei and apparently was able to build his own D-Wheel. Why didn't he help Yusei make his current one so he can go after Jack? We're also merely shown that Crow is willing to stick at this sector security, so why wasn't he willing to help Yusei get out of Satellite? Crow could have easily caused a distraction to get sector security off Yusei's back while he escaped from Satellite to go after Jack. From a writing perspective, there's no actual build-up to Crow's character before this introduction. He's not even mentioned before his introductory episode. And then, all of a sudden, we're just expected to believe that someone who has a connection between the two most important characters in the first 30 episodes just pops out of nowhere? Honestly speaking, looking towards the other characters too, we've already established quite a bit of backstory for them, and because of that, we now have another character who needs to take time and have his past be explored as well. To put in perspective, Yusei and Jack's backstory was pretty quickly established in the first 5 episodes. Then you got the twins Ruka and Rua, which while not certainly as deep, did establish the sister had a connection with the spirit world, and Aki, whose backstory is the last to be explored in the first 30 episodes, still shows quite a bit of why she is the way she is around episode 24. And to be frank, Crow doesn't really get much backstory about himself or why he is the way he is until episode 94. That is insane! We do get other little breadcrumbs about Crow's past, like how he admired a legendary D-Wheeler who essentially used a bridge and a D-Wheel to fly across the sea to escape Satellite, and he actually learned how to read because of duel monsters. That's something, but when the legendary D-Wheeler is revealed to be the major antagonist of the Dark Signer arc, we don't really get too much of a payoff for it. At most, we get a reason as to why Crow has a connection to the antagonists and actually adds something for Crow to do, and
it's giving us power like never before! The mark of the dragon head is with me? Huh? What in the world?
We'll be getting back to that. Trust me, I've got a lot to say about that. One of the first things I don't really like about Crow is that it feels like he's a character that's shoehorned into the plot and into the other characters' backstories. And frankly speaking, I feel that because of this inclusion, it's really hampered the writing of the other characters and the story. It's a complaint I've always had when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially in my videos. A bloated cast. I'm not talking about one-off characters or side characters. Yu-Gi-Oh! As a series always has big casts of characters, even the main circle of characters, but because of that you have to divert attention to and from certain characters, especially with the limited screen time that you have. And even more so, like unlike the original Yu-Gi-Oh!, much of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Animes are original properties and don't have original manga to base their plots and character beats off of. Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's main cast was already pretty big, with 5 main members who are essentially all chosen ones, but with Crow, you've added a 6th wheel into that fray. Oftentimes when it comes to Crow, you hear complaints about how he stole the limelight from other characters like Aki and the twins, characters who had great establishments and character arcs in the first part of the series, but then followed the wayside in favor of following the big 3 of Yusei, Jack, and Crow. And at times, especially before Crow got that blasted mark on his arm, it really felt like the writers were trying to push him into having connection with the actual main plot. Take for example with his duel with Bomber, a prominent character from the first season's tournament arc who got wrapped up with the Dark Signers and eventually challenges Crow to a duel. For context, in episode 44, when Crow was fighting against another character, Jaeger, thinking that the clown was a Dark Signer, yes, evil clowns. Before the duel between Crow and Jaeger could finish, a load of darkness springs up with Crow driving his D-Wheel trying to escape it, only to survive by hiding in a fridge. Yes. He pulled an Indiana Jones to survive. Anyway, Crow does get injected into the actual plot with his duel with Bomber. I'm not actually opposed to this since the duel does show a bit of backstory for Crow, and there is a tangentially related motivation for both characters. Bomber as a character established that he wants to avenge his village, and that dark cloud that almost engulfed Crow basically absorbed the souls of the orphans that Crow was taking care of. While I have gripes with Crow being injected into the plot like this, in this duel, it kinda works. We learn an interesting fact about Crow and actually how we learn to read by duel monster cards. That's something I enjoy, plus this kinda is badass. We're told constantly before this point that signers are the only ones who can take down a dark signer. It's something that established pretty quick, but this duel proves that dark signers are just duelists with supernatural abilities and they can still lose. Crow was in an interesting position since he was an outsider, and said outsider was able to go toe-to-toe with a dark signer. I stated before on my channel that I'm not a huge fan of the chosen one tropes. That doesn't mean it can't work, I'm just not a fan of it. So when you've got an outsider who's able to do, at the very least, make a dent in the enemy forces, and is able to keep on fighting, that's something that I love in a character. I know that it sounds that aside from the questions about his backstory and him being injected into the plot that I may actually like Crow. And here's the thing. I used to. But that only lasted until... Aki Izayoiの朝が俺たちに力を与えてくれる。ドラゴンヘッドの朝が俺に。こいつはなぜだ。赤木龍は神たる我を選んだのではなかったのか。違う。絆を選んだんだ。俺たちのこの絆が運命を超えていく。Alright, let's talk about it. I don't think I'm being out there when I say this has been a pretty contentious point when it comes to the Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's anime and fandom. Crow becoming a signer. Now, there are a number of reasons why people took issue with this, and frankly speaking, I kind of agree with them. Turning Crow Hogan into a signer is a polarizing moment, and even I know some people who like the character did not like this choice. And there are a few reasons for it, one of them being the praise that I gave Crow. As a non-signer, he was willing to spit in the face of things like prophecy and destiny, showing that stuff didn't matter. And so what if the dark signers had this magic glue that can make them strong? They could still lose to the average duelist and show that anyone was capable of fighting back. He was a character who was fighting fate, and fighting not only for his future, but for the future of those in Satellite. There was also the fact that when we're shown a flashback earlier in the series, showcasing the 5 dragons that were the dragons of fate, and notably, Crow's dragon, which wouldn't show up until the 90s episodes, is not among them. Hell, the character whose dragon was there, Rua, wasn't made a signer until the very end of the series. And to give context about the situation, the leader of the Dark Signers, Rex Godwin, was both a Dark Signer and a signer as well. You couldn't really give Rua his own mark because this whole shtick with the villain would have gone out the window. You couldn't have anyone else become a signer at that point because 1, at this point we know that there were only 5 signers, and 2, there wasn't context that there could have been a 6th signer. Back to Crow, my biggest issue is that because of this mark, they essentially just spat on the characterization and the ideas they had for the show, and Crow himself. The guy was essentially pissing on fate, not really caring about being a signer and more or less caring about the well-being of Satellite and its citizens. And the Crimson Dragon's all like, now you get to be a signer too! You get a sign mark! You get a signer mark! And you get a signer mark! There's also the lack of Crow's deck having a dragon in it. Yeah, his black wings are pretty cool, but not a single dragon card in his deck at all. And when he did get a dragon, its effects were, well, there was no actual synergy with his deck. A look at the other signer duelists in their decks will showcase that while they have other strategies that interlock with their dragon's abilities, even Rua, whose dragon is a machine type, works in tandem with his deck that had a focus on equip cards. Crow's dragon, though, it's an anti-burn strategy that doesn't really come up that often, especially with black wings. It's got an upgraded version since then, but we're talking about a narrative idea back in the day. What's even stupider is that apparently Crow's dragon was stuck in his D-wheel. No, I'm not even kidding about that. The dragon was in his D-wheel the whole time, which leads to some interesting questions. Like, in the episode where Crow is set to get his own dragon, he claims that his D-wheel, the Blackbird, was actually left to him by another character named Pearson. Let's put aside the fact that, once again, this is the first time we learn about a character that's supposedly really important, especially when it pertains to Crow. Not once, in the 63 episodes that we get after Crow's introduction, does Pearson come up. At all. And that's weird because it also contradicts a line where we first see Crow and Yusei together.
ついにお前の D ホイールも完成したのか。ああ、最高にクールなやつだ。こいつでお前もジャックもぶっちぎってやるぜ。
So apparently Crow finished his D-wheel But he didn't actually build it? The scene with Yusei reuniting with Crow suggests to the audience that 1. Crow built his D-wheel by himself, for himself, and 2. Yusei knew about it for a while already. I suppose he could have been repairing it from Pearson. I mean, the guy did die in a fire. This is a personal issue? What, being on fire? But if that's the case, Crow never replaced parts or got an upgrade? And what about where the damn thing is? How the frick did Pearson put that card in the D-wheel? Why did he put it in there? Blackwing Dragon just pops out of Crow's D-wheel for no reason. And how did no one find the damn thing? We see plenty of times where the cast's D-wheels are being tinkered with on screen before this point, and no one saw this at all. It's a really messy contradiction in the lore and characterization of Crow, and I'm not that big of a continuity snob, but it comes off as if the writers didn't have an idea for Crow after the Dark Signers arc, which is sadly something that can be expanded upon to the second half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, but that's for a different video. Really, the issue comes up because Crow was a signer. Because instead of just being a scrappy Robin Hood-like figure from the satellite trying to help out orphan kids and his friends, he now needs to have a backstory to explain not only how Crow got his own signer dragon, but also to interject a theme of legacy into Crow. Because Blackwing Dragon, the D-wheeled Blackbird, and possibly even Crow's Blackwing cards were all supposedly Pearson's belongings. I say this because Pearson, before he dies in a fire, literally, gives Crow his dual disc and Pearson's deck is in the damn thing. So was Pearson supposed to be the 5th signer but died before the predestined events? Or does the Crimson Dragon get to choose the different dragons to become signer dragons? That's not even raising the question of how the other signers got their own dragons, which could have been a fun little exploration of lore and characterization for the signers and have them bond over it, but nope, don't get that either. Making Crow a signer was a bit of a mess, and before you ask, no, I'm not blaming Crow. If anything, the biggest issue with Crow comes from the writing of the series. He's more of a symptom than anything else. I have made it no secret in my videos about Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, and even in this one, that the biggest flaw of 5d's was its second half, especially in the writing. And Crow, I believe, is a focal point of that, since he was made into the third element of the trio of characters, Yusei, Jack, and Crow. Hell, even the opening credits make that apparent for the 3rd season. It's because of this and the structure of the latter half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's that had a tournament arc that had continuous 3-on-3 duel setup that it really choked out a lot of other potential plot points and pushed other characters like Aki and the twins to the side. When you look at some of the many side plots that were raised and didn't either come to fruition or were rushed through, it's easy to see that there were issues. The twins learning how to use D-boards so they can speed duel and fight against the big bads for this arc? They only speed duel once, and it's for these 2 episodes where they get the boards, and they don't ever speed duel again. Cards of Darkness, Blood Mephis, Doomray, and Hook the Hidden Knight. Cards that can actually inflict damage onto people, introduced as a threat, but never get really explored other than being one-off lines. Aki losing her psychic powers, only to get them back a few episodes later. Speaking of Aki, Sherry LeBlanc, a prominent character introduced when Yusei was kidnapped.
私はシェリー・ルブラン。あなたの実力を試させてもらったわ。女 D ホイーラ。
She actually showed interest in Aki, especially after Aki saved her life with her psychic powers.
お願い、スターダストドラゴン。サイコデュエリスト。
And by interest, I mean...
それからあなたも面白い子ね。
And yes, that gets rushed to all hell in the final arc, and for some goddamn reason, the writers thought it'd be a good idea that the actual duel between Aki and Sherry needed Crow in it, with him getting more of a focus. And that's just some of the issues with 5d's writing, and I bring this up because there's a ton of filler episodes that ultimately, while interesting and fun to watch, mainly because Crow gets hurt, don't really lend any development to the overall plot or even the characters. And that does overall hurt the story and the characters, especially since one of the prevailing themes of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's is bonds, and more specifically, the connection between the signers. Ultimately, if I somehow had the ability to change the plot of 5d's, I would have at least made the filler much more character-based and have the signers pair up in episodes, growing not only as people, but as friends as well. Because we do get moments of that. Like, some of my favorite scenes actually include stuff like Yusei Yusei helping Aki out with trying to get her D-wheel license, and showing her the ropes by roller skating.
するならこれがうってつけだ。まさかスケート初めてなのか。
こんなとこ来たことないから。
God damn it, Shin Yoshida, these two are so cute! I'll never understand why these two couldn't be a thing in the ending. Screw you, Shin Yoshida! But there's also a scene in the WRGP that involves Crow and Aki, where Aki has to take Crow's place in the tournament, much to Crow's protest, since she's a rookie. And since she ultimately didn't do that well in the actual match, Aki gets depressed about being a detriment to the team.
しっかりしろ。完璧なやつなんているもんか。俺もジャックもユーセイだってまだまだ未熟なんだよ。未熟な奴ら同士ががむしゃらやってお互いを鍛え合えるからデュエルは楽しいんじゃねえか。
However, Crow doesn't admonish her. Aki's well aware of how poor her dueling was in a professional setting, and even when she was given Yusei's Stardust Dragon to help her out, she failed. However, instead, Crow values her effort in what she did. The problem from this, despite me liking it, is that it comes from Aki's setup with learning how to do riding duels, and it comes off as intentionally writing her to be a sacrificial lamb for Yusei to pull the victory out of his helmet, and in turn wastes not only the heartwarming scene Aki and Crow have here, but also the conflict that Crow had with Aki taking his place when he was injured, and because she ultimately achieved very little in the duel itself. I will not lie here. A lot of the writing issues do use Crow as a scapegoat for the issues I had with Yugioh 5d's. I still do not like the character, but a lot of that is attributed to the messy decisions that Yugioh 5d's had. It's just that Crow goes in tandem with it. If you want an example of how messed up the writing got for Crow Hogan, just take a look at what happens in the final episodes. He becomes a member of Sector Security. Essentially a cop. It makes my head spin that the writers thought making the guy who has tons of security markers plastered on his face, a guy whose introduction was to be a Yu-Gi-Oh version of Robin Hood, actively stealing from Sector Security, fights against Sector Security multiple times, and has a past with Sector Security, why the bloody hell would Crow join Sector Security? And how? He's still technically a criminal with those markers on his face. Yeah, let's take our rogue character and turn him into a copper. That's not jarring as all hell. Once again, we're missing vital setup and information about why Crow would choose this line of work. I'm just glad in the epilogue time skips, we learn he actually quit being a security officer to become a professional duelist. That certainly would have been a weird note to end Crow on. If you've noticed something in this video, especially with my critiques of Crow, a lot of the issues stem from the writing not actually doing proper setup with the character and any development that he could have had. And ultimately, it feels like Crow is a rushed character. The writers try to make him a likable character at the start and then rush him to make him into a signer. Then they have to waste our time with tons of filler before we actually get a contradicting backstory. Then rush a believable character dynamic with one other character of the signers. He almost comes off as wasted time of potential. And since a lot of the time he's regulated to duels that ultimately don't matter since they don't set up anything of meaning and don't really develop his character, which there really isn't any character development for him. Crow is a static character, and the only time he really changes is when it's a neck-snapping change like him becoming a cop, which is weird because he was elevated out of nowhere to become a protagonist and pushing the other half of the main cast that was established to the side. As a character on paper, Crow is fine, but the execution and utilization of him is what makes me hate him as a character, especially since it's at the expense of the other characters too. But it didn't have to be this way, and there's one actual change that could have been done to make a lot of these issues disappear. Oftentimes, when you watch YouTube critiques, especially when it comes to writing or mechanics, people just want to put out their criticisms and leave it at that.
It's a fictional product. It doesn't matter.
And don't get me wrong, I'm fine with doing that for a while, because sometimes most people are just there for the critique and don't care for how to fix it, especially when it comes to writing, since a lot of the time it can come off as being just fan fiction. Well, I used to be a fan fiction writer until I realized I couldn't get any money, and no, you cannot find my fan fiction items.
Reading that crap.
But just for today, let me explore the simple change that could ultimately fix some of Crow's writing issues. And that's to not make him a signer, at least not when he canonically did. You see, you can either do two things with this. One, Rua actually gets the tail mark and becomes a proper signer, or two, Godwin is actually defeated and the fifth mark disappears. Either way would work, but the main goal is to keep Crow as a rogue element, that he doesn't have a mark and make him a part of the main cast. After all, Rua wasn't a signer, but he still was a part of the main cast, and you could even have a bit of a camaraderie set up between the two. especially if you make it so the 5th mark disappears. After all, their closest friends and even family are signers, and they could be the odd men out. It not only allowed these two to have a common element between them, but would allow Rua to have more admiration for Crow, since, you know, Crow was able to defeat a dark signer without actually needing help from another signer, something that Rua didn't have the ability to do. And you can even turn the whole Blackwing Dragon event into a build-up for Crow. Instead of it coming out of nowhere, you could have it be foreshadowing that he could potentially become a signer himself, instead of it just being plopped onto him, especially since Blackwing Dragon doesn't get an upgrade, much like how Yusei and Jack's aces got powered up in the series. It also would add a bit of tension and mystery, especially if we go with the mark just disappearing when Godwin is defeated, and whether the mark is completely gone, or if Rua and Crow would be the ones to inherit it. Now, does this change fix Crow completely? No, but it does address some of the major issues that I have with him as a character in the writing of 5d's. But that is ultimately a fictional band-aid on a gaping wound that is the writing of this series. I hope I've demonstrated well in this video why I dislike Crow, and it actually isn't the character's fault in and of itself that is the issue I have with him. We do have to realize, though, that the writers actively chose to focus on him, a character who came out of nowhere. He did take time from the show and push other characters out of the spotlight, as well as making some of the plot points and setup make no sense. There are many things that I love about Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, but the people behind the show decided to not focus on the plot threads and potential that they had at their fingertips, and putting more into Crow, who ultimately didn't really develop as a character. And there are things I didn't get into that would have been completely paid to bring up. His one-sided duels, the stagnant personality, the whole idea of underdogs being overdone, and the fact that he was brought back into another show and actually made the whole series a slog to get through because of his redundancy. But do I hate Crow as a character? In a vacuum, no, I don't. On paper, the guy is a perfectly fine character concept, but he represents a lot of the issues I have with writing of characters, pushing other characters out of the limelight, not actually developing as a character, and frankly speaking, the biggest issue, I find him boring. He isn't offensive as a character like, say, Chloe Price, but ultimately, Crow is one of the worst things you can have in your piece of media. An ultimately wasted character that drags down the potential of the entire media. So, if you enjoyed the video, please put down in the comments the one phrase you really like me for. Fuck you, Crow! I'm MangaKamen, and thanks for watching. Fuck you, Crow.
I like the night. No one can see me in the dark.
Last year, I was on a bit of a kick with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime videos, talking about the issues with the female characters, the games, and finally delving into the characters in and of themselves. Maximilian Pegasus, Jack Atlas, and, of course, Crow Hogan. Now, obviously, I have a love for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Series. It's practically been a part of my life ever since as far as I can remember, and with a fondness of the 3rd iteration of the series, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's in particular. Of course, many people who are familiar with my channel for a few years are probably well aware that last year wasn't when I started making dedicated videos diving into characters and going on about what they are. Probably one of my older and favorites would be the subject of today's video, Aki Izayoi. And yes, I am referring to her actual Japanese name. I do not even understand why they went with Akiza. But regardless of my obvious bias, I wanted to revisit the character and the video's concepts. Not only because do I think it's proper to continue the trend of talking about 5d's characters in an analytical sense, but also because I feel it's appropriate to dedicate a video to her without having to compare her to, well...
I'm Price. Chloe Price. Bang! Bitch.
Listen, I have Life is Strange's latest game on the chopping block, but I don't really need to have Chloe as my punching bag for this one. I'll get to it later. But for right now, sit back, rev up them draw tablets. I'm MangaKamen. This is Aki Izayoi, the beauty of tragedy.
Why are you so quiet? If you don't want to duel, I'm going home.
Much like the last time I brought up this topic, I think it's key that we set up the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. This is a show that is about 17 years old at this point, so some of my audience may be even younger than it. Soon enough, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's will be old enough to vote and get booze legally. Better lay off the D-wheels when that happens. Drink responsibly, kids! Welcome to the future, my friends, where our story is divided into two places, Neo Domino City and Satellite. The new cities that were built upon the remains of the original Domino City, the location that was very prevalent in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Series where most of the story took place, and was the hometown of Yugimoto, and was a notable location in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. Both Neo Domino City and Satellite are two sides of the same coin. While they are connected, they are opposite from each other. Satellite is a floating island of a junkyard, where the inhabitants are treated like the garbage that is sent there, where every day is a living hell. On the upside, there's Neo Domino City, where the upper crust of society live, a technological marvel that accurately displays the good of a futuristic society. Point that there's an obvious class system going on here, especially in regards to Satellite, since it's also where Domino City will send its criminals, after they get branded with criminal marks. If you have a criminal mark, not only are you now tagged by the government to know where you're at, but anyone with a mark is seen as a criminal regardless of the seriousness of their crime. Of course, that's the basic world building. What about the basic story in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's? The story begins with our protagonist, Yusei Fudo, a young man raised in Satellite who's not only a genius at the game of Duel monsters, but is also a great mechanic, even to the point where he's able to build a D-wheel out of whatever parts he can find amongst the garbage. His goal is to go after Jack Atlas, the king of duelists in Neo Domino City, a man who was a former friend who not only stole the first D-wheel that Yusei successfully built, but also Yusei's ace card, Stardust Dragon. That card was a beacon of hope to Yusei and his friends, signifying that they would one day leave Satellite.
今どこにある？もう壊れたに決まっているだろ。俺のカードはスターダストドラゴンか？俺たちの夢だった。俺たちの？サテライトの仲間。みんなの夢だ。
So, what does this have to do with the actual character of this video, Aki Izayoi? Well, Yusei, Jack, and Aki are a part of a group called the Signers, people who have a connection with the ancient deity, the Crimson Dragon. At the beginning of the story, it's foretold that there are 5 Signers, each with a mark on their arm that glows at times, even through clothes. Essentially, the Signers are duelists who are foreseen to become entangled with fate, uniting the Signer and eventually defeating oncoming threats. That's all you really need to know for now before we get into the actual analysis of Aki, but to make it clear, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, at least in the first half of the series, had a utopian society with a dark underbelly that the citizens of Neo Domino City prefer to just ignore. Discrimination was a key theme in the series, and for an anime that's mostly focused about cards and selling those cards, 5d's attempted to tell a more mature story, and while it has its goofy elements...
Look! Is Jack Atlas not the finest sushi chef in the land?
Oh, we're a pizza joint, you nut!
It's not as goofy as the previous iteration of Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. I mean, you tell me how cracked up Yu-Gi-Oh! GX is when you have a character project a dinosaur version of himself into space, team up with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Version of the Guyver, just so they can blow up a satellite that would brainwash the entire world if they failed. Now, I'm not knocking it, I'm just pointing out that 5d's was attempting to be a bit more serious in comparison to GX. GX, though...
That's right, Poopyhead! My mommy says I'm really strong! You hear me?
Man, that's a hell of a drug. I should really revisit my GX video sometime. But enough about the foundation of the world and basic plot of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's and how GX is on crack. We should actually talk about Aki Izayoi.
Who wants to tag with a witch?
So, who is Aki Izayoi? From my experience, it's been a hotly debated topic in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Fanbase that she's one of the most fleshed out characters, especially for the women, in the franchise. Not only that, she has a very unique background that makes her stand out arguably from even the male characters. And that's because the series that she's from was geared towards a more mature audience. That in turn allows the show to cover topics that range from classism, systematic oppression, evil cults, the Crash Town arc with its classy ass flower shop, or the purposes of this video and the character of Aki, loneliness, mental health, abandonment, exploitation, and many others. Cards on the table, I am a huge fan of Aki, and I believe she is probably one of the best characters in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, at least in the first half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, with a lot of the issues stemming from the second season that make me go, ugh. But for what we got, I do believe that Aki's story is compelling, and for our lady in Yu-Gi-Oh! I'll say there hasn't been a comparative story to hers since then. So that leads me to the question, how is she compelling? Well, let's start with what Aki actually is. She's a psychic duelist, which in the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! Psychic duelists are people who have the ability to materialize actual damage with duel monster cards by using them on a duel disc or just holding them up. Think of it as a more sci-fi version of the Shadow games from the original Yu-Gi-Oh! And she manifested her powers when she was a little girl. girl. Coming from a wealthy family with her father being a prominent senator in Neo-Domino City, Aki had a bit of a lonely childhood since her father had a lot of duties and couldn't spend time with his family. Work was the priority, and to the extent that he missed her birthday a number of times. And when he was able to spend time with her playing the most popular card game on the planet, Duel Monsters, he had to cut it short when work called him. Now, Aki is a kid when this happened, and when your father does this sort of thing, it would frustrate any kid. But when this happened, not only did Aki's psychic powers wake up, but so did the Mark of the Dragon.
ローズフレームの効果発動
And then this happened. This is an 8-year-old kid, by the way. Aki, having just gained these powers, obviously not purposely hurting your father in the process and being called a monster by your family, that can mess up a kid, and only escalated further and further. Tensions rise, and it got to the point where Aki's own father slaps her. I'm sure that this is a bit of a shock for people who aren't really familiar with the original Japanese version of Yu-Gi-Oh! And usually just stick with the dub, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Does have a tendency to have some really dark moments in it. The original Yu-Gi-Oh! Had things like the threat of buzzsaws tearing into your legs when you lost a duel, or when Pegasus was killed in the manga, or that one of the other main villains was abused by his family to have an ancient Egyptian marking burned into his back as a kid. However, even though there was supernatural elements involved with the psychic powers, Aki's story has a much more grounded element to it, because parents who are frustrated with their kids can and have taken things a bit too far, and that can mess up anyone as a child. Because what we have here is a somewhat neglected child who awakened to a power that she obviously cannot control, gets shunned for it, not just by her parents, but also from other children. And it continued when Aki was forced to go to Duel Academy and okay, I typically like the design choices for Yugioh, and I love the more outlandish design elements, but the giant duelists are way too much for this school. Back on point, Aki was supposed to go to Duel Academy with the hopes of reigning in her powers, but that was a fruitless endeavor. She even attacked some students with her abilities and had to leave in order to get back to her home. And unfortunately, when she did, she discovered that her parents were happy without her. Then, something snapped. So in comparison to the other leading ladies that I've talked about on this channel when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh!, characters like Anzu, Asuka, Kotori, and Yuzu, Aki stands out a lot more since she has a much more tragic backstory with a compelling character who's had to deal with not only the issues of her ever-dangerous powers, but also being rejected by those she thought who loved her by those powers. The rest of the leading girls don't really have that same tragic background, and while I'm not saying you need one in order to be unique, Aki does stand out because of it and has a great setup for her storyline. You have the makings for a great character who in her mind has been abandoned, and thus I ask, what's the next step you need to take with this character to keep that premise going strong and make her tragic? Well, you talk about how people will exploit that vulnerability.
Suffer like you never have before!
When people are in vulnerable positions, they tend to be suggestible and primed for exploitation. And if you're not familiar with the concept of exploitation, it's taking advantage of others for your own gain, and will manipulate people's emotions or mental state for their own ends. Unfortunately, this is a concept that we see in our real world, and it can come in many different forms. Guilt tripping, underpaying people, or YouTubers who have primed their audiences to become their personal banks and scam wallets. There are countless ways for manipulation to come into play, and it wasn't too long ago that we talked about manipulative characters on this channel again, because shock of all shocks, it's not just villains who can be crafty with people. Exploitation is a topic that needs to be discussed and showcased in media so people can understand a fraction of the tactics used by these manipulators so that way they do not get controlled by them. And in my opinion, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's does a good job of that. So, meet Divine. He's the leader of the Arcadia movement, an organization whose public goal is to help those with psychic powers. Aki isn't the only psychic duelist in the world, and she sure isn't the first to experience the discrimination because of the powers she was born with. Divine is a psychic duelist as well, although he's not as strong as Aki, and he expresses this himself. When it comes to exploitation, one of the greatest factors is to consider the timing of events. Divine appeared before Aki when she was essentially homeless on the street, hiding her face behind the mask of the Black Rose Witch, with thoughts of her parents hating her, being ostracized from the public, and her powers becoming dangerous more and more by the day. Unfortunately, when in times of vulnerability, people will become desperate. They will accept whatever help they can, any sort of kindness offered to them to help them through their trying times. And that's what Divine was to Aki. He was a ray of hope to the girl who was drowning in despair, and while Divine does help Aki to an extent, he's not doing it out of the kindness of his heart. Yes, he helped her control her psychic powers to a degree, gave her a new home, but he has a goal to use her like a puppet. Divine's idea was to create an army of psychic duelists to overthrow the current government and leaders of Neo Domino City, and then continue his conquest throughout the world. He wanted to make Aki into a weapon, and unfortunately, he succeeded, under the guise of wanting to remove the pain that Aki had experienced in her young life.
お前は本来のお前のままただいればいいんだよ。
ディバイン。私はディバインに導かれていればよかった。
It got to the point that Aki was willing to throw away any personal agency she had just to be accepted by someone, anyone. Yes, she has powers that can hurt people, but at the end of the day, she's still a human being, and humans are fragile creatures that can break in a number of ways. So we do what we can to make any sort of pain go away.
魔女の私が何を考える？ディバインが私を導いて愛してくれればそれで。
違う。お前がお前を愛するんだ。
Love. Huh? It's moments like these that make me enthralled with Aki as a character. She's a broken person, and while Aki may have amazing powers to make monsters and card effects come to life, it's a power she ultimately cannot control. And in a world where duel monsters has become a major part of society and culture, it's hard to not be ingrained into it one way or another. So when Aki is broken by all the tragedy and misfortune this power brought to her, she wants someone, anyone at all, to reach out to her and tell her that she's worth something. It's just unfortunate that the first hand she took was a man who saw her only worth as a weapon, a tool to be manipulated because of her shattered emotions, holding on to her strings like a puppeteer.
Fudo Yusei, お前も私を助けてよ。そう、唯一私をこの世で受け入れてくれたのはディバインだけ。彼だけが私に居場所を与えてくれた。
I will confess, I do have issues with some of Aki's writing, especially with how it's wrapped up, and even more so in the second half of the series, which I will be getting onto later on. But for this video, to me, this is how you write a tragic character, and actually use that tragedy in the development of said character, while at the same time showing your audience that there are monsters out there who are willing to lend you a hand, a deal with the devil as it were. This is a lesson that people do need as a cautionary tale, that sometimes people in vulnerable states of mind will face against extreme hardships and people will take advantage of that. But that doesn't mean that every hand that reaches out is looking to use you like a tool. Sometimes there are people who genuinely care about you.
Such pain. It's not over yet. I can't lose. Not now.
At times, the hand that reaches out to you may have harmful intentions behind it, but other times there are those who legitimately care to help you. And it's at this point I need to warn about spoilers even more, since this one will have a lot of stuff that happens in the tail end of the first half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. But if you're looking for a recommendation for an anime about card games, I would happily suggest the sub version of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. Try to avoid the dub though. Aside from the funny meme lines, it makes the writing a bit unlikable.
You don't like bugs.
Yeah, ever since that roach nested in his ear, he freezes up if you just say the word insect. I sure hope this doesn't throw him off his game. Come on, Yus. You can do this!
Unnecessary changes to names, censorship of scenes and plot beats, padding out the episodes with card summaries, times where characters don't know when to shut up, cutting out the last quarter of the whole series, and some odd choices.
How does it look, Doctor?
He's got some serious bruising on the right side of his abdomen.
Is he going to be all right?
It's a long shot.
Come on, Yusei.
That scene originally had Yusei with shrapnel lodged into him, but I guess bruising on the side is enough to warrant surgery now. But yeah, just wanted to give that disclaimer and recommendation before we get back to the actual substance of this video. We went over that Divine's intention was to use Aki as a tool. His hand reached out in a form of kindness that veiled his true intentions. However, there was another hand that reached out to Aki eventually, and that was the main character, Yusei Fudo.
拒絶と怒りと
Although when the two first met, it was a bit of an oddity.
忌むべき印だ。
なぜ忌むべき印だ。あざはお前にとって何なんだ。
私はこの印を持つ者を憎む。剣をする。
During this time, Yusei, while he had an interest with the mystery of the marks on the signer's arms, had another issue that was more important. His friends were being held hostage to goad Yusei into participating in a tournament that would draw out the signers. I bring this up because Yusei doesn't start out wanting to help Aki. That's not his main goal. On the other side of that coin, Aki doesn't listen to anyone other than Divine. She's been saved by him with his silky words and promises, but that was a false world. A falsehood that she was willing to be blinded by because she was saved by Divine. However, this is where we bring up the connection that I brought up earlier in the video, the signer connection. For context's sake, in the first half of the first season, it was focused on a tournament cobbled together by director Rex Godwin, take your pick really, a prominent character who I don't want to go too in-depth into because I feel like he deserves his own video someday. For the purposes of this video, what you need to know is that he's an important character with a ton of connections and had the goal of uniting the signers with this tournament. That includes Aki, Jack, Yusei, and a few other characters too, with the additional goal of fully awakening the signers' abilities. The other thing you need to know that Yusei, while his friends are being held as hostages, knows that Godwin isn't meant to be trusted. Good call, considering that guy was willing to use hostages to fulfill his goals.
俺たちを繋いでいる。奴らはそれに気づき、俺たちを利用しようとしているのか。イザヨイを取り巻くあの連中も、俺たちは利用されてはいけない。彼女の閉ざされた心。それをこじ開け、本当のイザヨイに会わなければ。
Eventually, Yusei and Aki duel against each other, with Aki's powers having been shown earlier in the tournament, with Yusei having to deal against the same power. And every time Yusei takes the actual damage, he has his thoughts that she could be taking a sick pleasure in the created torture.
痛みを与えて、それを喜ぶ恐ろしい女。楽しいわ。私を孤独に追いやるすべての者どもに、本当に楽しい。
楽しんでいる。だが、その喜びを彼女自身は。
I think it should be noted that before her duel with Yusei, Aki had two prior duels in the tournament. A knight who proclaimed to be a royal bloodline and a man called the Profiler who was specifically called in to psychologically torture Aki during their match. During both of these duels, they dehumanize her, referring to her as a witch or a monster, with the Profiler taking it even further by digging up elements of her past, taunting Aki in the process. And when it comes to Yusei versus Aki, Yusei brings up the idea that Aki enjoys torturing people like some sort of sadist. But as the duel continues onward, there's something more beneath the surface.
考えてくれる。
逃げるな、イザヨイ。
どうしようもない。私にはどうすることもできない。
その喜びを否定するお前がいる。その思いがある限り、やり直せる。お前自身を。
Drawing out his ace, Stardust Dragon, on the field, we as the audience and Yusei learn that under the joy of hurting others, Aki holds a lot of self-loathing. It's why Aki was willing to create the witch persona that allowed her to feel joy when she hurt others. It was a means of dissociation. When Stardust hit the field, it activated both of their marks. And there's a line that I think should be noted. It's when Aki says that it's a detestable mark, and because it appeared when she got her powers, it's associated with her pain. She believes that without the birthmark and powers, society wouldn't have rejected her, and as such, she wouldn't have become the witch. The phrase, "that's why I hate myself," leaves Aki's lips, and that's why she created the Black Rose Rich persona, for the purposes of disassociation. And unfortunately, because of that mind state where she created that persona, that's when Divine took advantage of her, and she allowed him to think for her from then on. And she's fine with that. She doesn't have to have those terrible feelings weighing on her heart. And if Divine wants to carry that burden for her, Aki's more than willing to allow him. Now here's where Yusei comes into play. He starts off by saying that she shouldn't run from her problems, which, while true, isn't really helpful in the matter. Of course, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's allows this conversation to be continued both literally and done through the process of their card game. Yusei points out the fact that Aki is attempting to dissociate from her actions shows that she can save herself. She's capable of saving herself. Not Yusei, not Divine, Aki can save herself. Of course, it's a given that this sort of harsh truth is something that can easily be hammered in, so Aki does retaliate. And there's some things I need to point out here. One being Aki's ace card, the Black Rose Dragon, a powerful synchro monster back in the day that when summoned could wipe out the entire field, including itself in the process. It's a good representation of Aki's mindset during this time, since it shows that she's obviously willing to lash out against people, more of a defensive mechanism, much like her Black Rose Witch was as well. Though, if we want to read a little bit further into it, this effect shows that her actions are ultimately hurting her, since Black Rose Dragon destroys itself with its effect. But that's when we have to consider Yusei's ace, the Stardust Dragon, another powerful synchro monster that had the ability to not only negate the destruction of cards, but destroy the card that attempted the initial destruction. So Yusei takes the lashing out, but thanks to Stardust Dragon is able to accept Aki's feelings, represented by Stardust Dragon wrapping its wings around Black Rose Dragon and embracing it. It reminds me of people who lash out against others, but there's one person who's trying to stop them, since if the person lashing out continues, they'll hurt not only themselves but others too in the process. And it's during this moment that Yusei takes the victory and stops Aki from hurting the stadium full of people. All the while breaking that facade that Aki was using to protect herself, that was only holding her down like a chain. Of course, before Yusei can say anything else, the crowd then cheers at the witch's defeat, saying that she deserved that. When you really think about it, both Aki and Yusei have a similar backstory. They're both rejected upon things they couldn't change. Aki with her powers, and Yusei being satellite trash and now a criminal. Discrimination and suffering they faced is quite different, yes, but they both faced hardship, and because of that, a hand was reached out to Aki, a hand of kindness and understanding, with no actual malice behind a false face. And while it would take a while for that hand to be extended to her again, eventually Yusei does indeed reach out to pull Aki from the darkness that she was using to protect herself. A rose protected by thorns. Now I will say this part of Aki's arc is a little rushed, especially with her reconciling with her parents, but hey, it's still a heartwarming scene to me, and it really cemented how much I cared for this character and her story. An anime whose main goal is to showcase cards for our game managed to do a superb job of crafting an excellent backstory for a character and genuinely got me to care for her. That's worth some measure of respect to me. Now of course we need to talk about Aki's role in the second half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. Just to be fair,
You don't need to think about what to do.
The second half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D is a bit of a controversial talking point when it comes to the series. Hell, I'm even left conflicted when I talk about it on this channel because while there is some good to it, there's almost as equal things that I don't care during it. On the positives is some of the best setup for mystery and intrigue. There are times where humor does shine, and there are some of my favorite duels in the history of the franchise that belong to this section of the series. But on the negative, you've got the filler. You've got the plot points that get set up but don't go anywhere. And in the case of the topic of this video, the direction of Aki's writing. I want to make it clear that even though I highly disagree with the writing choices made with the second half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, that doesn't mean objectively it's bad writing. If anything, it's a combination of the missed potential, lacking direction, and of course, focusing on the trio that was Yusei, Jack, and fuck you, Crow. I know I have a bit of a reputation of hating on Crow, even to the point where I made a video expressing my issues with his character writing and how the inclusion of him made a bit of a mess of the series. It got to the point where people think my opinion of Crow is literally just this image. Though if you watched the video, you'd know that I'm not the biggest fan of Crow. He was not the biggest issue of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. While I still maintain that Crow's inclusion into this series did have an effect on it, I'd be disingenuous for me to put the whole blame on him. If I really had to stretch it, I'd put more on the conventions of the series, but for a good portion of it, there's usually a trio dynamic which will often focus on the main three of the characters. In this case, Yusei, Jack, and fuck you, Crow. Of course, there are other factors like the WRGP, since it had a format that wouldn't leave a lot of screen time for other characters. Note, I'm making a distinction here between a lot and none at all. And as long as we're here, no, the second half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's wasn't affected by a Japanese voice actress being in a cult, Aki's actress becoming pregnant, or even trying to promote the Blackwing archetype. I've gone into detail in other videos how that isn't the case, but people for some reason seem to think that I believe that those are the reasons for the bad writing, when no. You see, the problem with Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, and I'm racing back to Aki in particular really soon, is a matter of pacing. You see, in the first season of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, we had this tightly knitted plot that had a lot of well-defined goals and various stakes for characters, especially since a good chunk of the characters, there were personal stakes. Meanwhile, the second had a lot more sluggish pace, with a ton of filler, and it takes so long to get to the actual tournament arc. And with said tournament arc, there were a lot of duels that were six-parters that essentially follow the same pattern of Jack and Crow getting defeated and ending with Yusei winning. Not helped with some of the contrived reasons that Yusei wins. One of the biggest examples is the duel with Team Unicorn, the team that essentially had Yusei dead to rights because all the duelist Gene had to do was end his turn to win, because he had essentially made made Yusei lose all the cards in his deck, meaning when Yusei's turn came around, he'd lose to deck out. But no, Jean decides to attack and gets dunked on by a card that no regular duelist would have in their deck. Because of all the pacing issues, it really came off as if the writers had no idea what to do with the characters and story at times. Getting back to Aki, you had a lot of potential with her. Especially since she did help save the world, she still had a ton of victims thanks to her power. There could have also been remnants of the Arcadia movement who wanted revenge. After all, Divine did get eaten up by a giant lizard, and subsequently got arrested because he came out alive. Not to complain that just because I didn't get what I want out of her storyline, but it's telling that the most that Aki gets in the second season is learning how to use a D-wheel, only to take part in one match throughout the tournament and then get sabotaged so she can't compete anymore, and then her losing her powers. Temporarily. It feels like it was all for nothing. And this isn't just an issue with Aki, but something that happens most of the cast. Not even the main character is above some of the issues here we discussed at how ass backwards the writers were willing to let him get a win. Still, it's an issue that happened to Aki's writing, and there's a reason why they labeled her as a bench warmer. Also, side note, this is probably the first time I got mad with shipping. There was so much done here, and it was wasted. Ugh, that ending.
Sorry, it was practically useless.
Regardless of my issues with Aki's writing in the second half, I can't help but still enjoy Aki's story from the first season. It was a story of a girl who was ostracized and treated as a tool, a broken person whom society had deemed a monster because of a power she couldn't control nor did she want, and the fact that she had to disassociate from that just so she could survive psychologically? That's fascinating. I'm sure it's a story that's been done multiple times in the past by other series, and there's nothing wrong with that. If anything, I appreciate the twist that Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's incorporated in order to tell Aki's tale. The big issue, though, comes from the second half where nothing was really done with her character outside of a few beats that ultimately did not matter. And while that same issue can apply to pretty much everyone in the writing department in the series, this is more to explain the reasoning. Still, for what we got in Aki's story in the first half, I still maintain that it made her one of the better Yu-Gi-Oh! Girls that we got. But of course, that's just one bonehead's opinion, and if you guys have any thoughts about Aki or my opinions on the series, I'd love to hear about them in the comments down below. It really helps out for me to learn more about other people's thoughts on the subject matters that we cover. Plus, hey, if this video does well, I'd love to focus more on my content on the individual characters of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise because there's a lot to go over with them. I'd love to talk about the rivals, the main protagonists, and of course the villains who are all so good in their own unique ways. So if you enjoyed the video, leave a comment telling me which character you'd like for me to analyze next in this series. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter. Till next time, I'm MangaKamen, and remember my friends, always reach out to those you care about. Later.
Mr. Yusei Fudo. Turbo dueling without a license, blah blah, malicious mischief, blah de blah blah. Entering the limits of New Domino City without a permit? Well now, we can't have that, can we? So here's a little tracking die.
Is it supposed to tickle?
It's supposed to make sure that we can keep an eye on you.
Man, the law is so confusing, ain't it? Hey yo, MangaKamen here, and if you've been around my channel for the last few years, you probably have seen a few videos talking about the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. I've talked about quite a few of the series and focusing on the characters. Sometimes it'll be about the villains like Pegasus or Vector. Other times it'll be characters like Jack Atlas, Aki Izayoi, or Crow Hogan. Or it'll be me expressing my issues with a series that had a ton of potential but ultimately failed because of pacing and terrible writing choices. And Crow. But one thing I don't normally talk about is the protagonists of the show in great depth. That isn't to say there isn't something interesting to talk about the characters like Judai or Yugi. Honestly, Judai's character break and becoming a supreme king is something I do want to tackle sometime in the future, since while it is fascinating as a character turn, there are some cracks in it. But I figured that since on this channel we've talked about mostly 5d's characters, we'd start with the protagonist of that series, Yusei Fudo.
You see, every card is special, and you just have to learn to appreciate its power in order to figure out how to best use it.
So, cards on the table, but I do consider Yusei to be one of my favorite protagonists in the series. Not because of his win rate, but because I appreciate a lot of things like his design, the basis for his character, and the motivation that we were introduced with in the series. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let's actually get into talking about Yusei Fudo, the pros, the cons, and how he's the two perfect protagonists. Spoilers for all of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. I I'm going to do the smart thing and not explain what Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's is, since pretty much every video where I've talked about it, I've gone in detail of the premise of it. So I don't want to keep repeating myself talking about the premise of a 17-year-old anime, which if you're like me, you're feeling kinda old right now. I got one from the grave at the moment. My own mortality aside, Yusei Fudo is a writing duelist from the island of Satellite, a downtrodden, oppressed sector of Neo-Domino City, where if you're either unlucky enough to be born there or get tossed there by the folks of the upper crust, you're marginalized, you're treated as outcast, and you have to root through garbage just to survive. Yusei Fudo is an orphaned young man who grew up on those streets, having scavenged whatever he could to not only build a working motorcycle that he can duel on, but even his own cards in his deck. Well, save for one.
Let's rev it up!
It wasn't easy for Yusei as a kid. His family gone and forced to grow up in a harsh environment, the only things that Yusei really had that mattered to him were his friends, namely the characters Jack Atlas and Crow Hogan. The three grew up in Satellite, even joining a duel gang called Team Satisfaction. Probably one of the more fantastic and suggestive names I've heard when referring to a group of teenage boys, all to take over Satellite from other duelists. And led by Kiryu, probably one of the coolest guys that Yusei and the others could rely on. At least until he killed someone! After Kiryu was arrested for murder and blowing up a building with duel discs, yes, really, Yusei, Jack, and Crow essentially distanced themselves from each other, the latter two being more distant. Crow, not so sure on that one. It wouldn't be until Jack was made an offer to get out of the living hell that was Satellite that things would make a turn for the worse. There were two things Jack needed. He needed to get a D-wheel to make his way to Neo-Domino City via a trash conveyor belt system, and he needed a specific card, Yusei's Stardust Dragon, the card that represented Yusei's hope. Jack, in order to get the card, essentially put one of his and Yusei's mutual friends in danger, and while Yusei was out saving the kid, Jack took both the D-wheel and Stardust Dragon to escape to Neo-Domino, and thus we were given motivation by Yusei to chase after Jack and reacquire the Stardust Dragon, a card that wasn't just important to Yusei, but also represented the bonds of friendship and the hope that they would all get out of Satellite one day. That's really something that can describe Yusei. He's all about the bonds of friendship. Since growing up, that's really all he had that was precious to him. His friendship with Crow and Jack were important to him, since when you're living on an island of trash, that's kind of the best thing about it, that at least you're not alone. And as such, Yusei takes that and incorporates his card choices into his deck, making a representation of the importance of bonds. Yusei is a stoic, strategic, and empathetic hero who values his friends and fights for a better future. Growing up in Satellite, a scrap-filled wasteland, he learned to build and repair from whatever was available, which reflected in his deck's junk archetype and how he was able to build his own machines. These cards, often low level and unassuming, represent his underdog status and his ability to turn weakness into strength. His reliance on synchro summoning, combining monsters to create something greater, parallels his role as a unifier who brings people together to overcome challenges. One of Yusei's most iconic monsters, which was also the very last monster he summoned in the entire series, Junk Warrior, is a representation of Yusei and these themes. Junk Warrior gains attack points based on the power of other low-level monsters, symbolizing how Yusei draws strength from his allies like his Satellite friends to fight stronger foes. The card's scrappy, makeshift design usually ties into Yusei's mechanic background and Satellite-specific junkyard aesthetic. Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's explores themes of class division, redemption, and the power of human connection in a world split between the affluent Neo-Domino City and the oppressed Satellite. And Yusei's deck reflects these ideas, though it's focused on synchro summoning, which requires cooperation between monsters, symbolizing the series' emphasis on teamwork and breaking down barriers, which is a prime representation of Yusei's goals of breaking the barrier of Satellite in Neo-Domino to retrieve the beacon of hope, Stardust Dragon. Yusei as a character is humble, resourceful, and fiercely loyal, even to a fault. He and his deck serve as a small depiction of the series' themes of unity and redemption. I know I kind of slid into talking about theming of the series when we're talking about Yusei, but when you're talking about the protagonists, they should at the very least have some kind of inkling of the themes of the story, and Yusei certainly does fit that mold. But let's really dive into the positives on how he's a protagonist. Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's is a mature version of the series. At least that's what the internet told me, and they're never wrong about that.
Yusei, why don't you go look for it?
I would, but Clucker's deep fried chicken doesn't deliver itself. I'm on the clock.
I tried that Ultra Crispy Crisper the other day. It's a little heavy on the paprika, but otherwise I...
How are you talking about fast food right now?
Though, to be fair, that's the dub version, and the dub pretty much butchered a lot of the original story of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. I'm not just talking about the fact they had stuff that make the situation goofier than it was, or even the censorship.
Jack said with the right bait, Rally would lead us right to you. I knew we should have f***ed you when you were a kid. Looks like I'll finally get my wish.
Don't underestimate us satellites or our dicks, cause what you see as weakness is what truly makes us strong.
Ain't it magical how you can change the context of an entire conversation with just a single beep here and there, right? Of course! Now, I'm mostly talking about how there are whole chunks of the story that got removed, including the last portion of the final arc. Luckily, the dub sucks even worse in that regard, but we're getting off base here. Really, if you want to talk about the positives of Yusei as a protagonist, that really stems from how he and Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's had a really great start. Namely, the first 26 episodes have an amazing start to the series that showcases the strength of Yusei as a main character. The first is that Yusei is an underdog. I brought up how Satellite basically makes anyone who lives there considered human trash, effectively being held against doing what he wants to because the system is holding him back. And the fact that Yusei's actual goal isn't to break the barriers is something I enjoy because while that's something that he does end up doing, that's not his actual goal. No, his goal is a lot more personable. Not only was he betrayed by someone he once considered a friend, but the hope he was trying to instill in others in Satellite was stolen. It gives Yusei a clear and relatable goal, and one that is related to the broader societal conflict. Yusei does have to deal with the discrimination of where he was born, as highlighted in the first clip I showed where Yusei basically gets thrown into the slammer for simply escaping Satellite and getting branded like an animal with a criminal mark. A process that effectively scars him for the rest of his life, branding him as a criminal and a dangerous person, even though he really isn't. Well, I mean, hey, even non-dangerous people can kick ass every once in a while. My point is, yeah, Yusei did break the rules to get back what was stolen from him, mainly because the rules were extremely lopsided and discriminatory, but that's not why he does this. Throw in Yusei's deep-seated character trait about caring about his friends and allies, and I think you've got a great basis for a character, especially with the motivation that we were given. Plus, there are some small things that make me think Yusei is a good protagonist, especially in the first season, and that's the small things. I'm not just talking about the time he drank milk at a bar. One notable thing is that Yusei is flexible with his cards. There are a couple times in the first season where he has to use cards that he doesn't really own, the first being a cursed treasure deck and the second being a makeshift deck built upon cards kept by prisoners in the facility he was held up in.
Punch! This spell card got me out of a lot of tough jams. You can equip this on to almost any monster.
Use this card to put Armstrong in his...
I like to think that card in particular was the one that won Yusei the duel.
Hopefully it don't smell too bad.
The real point here is that Yusei is versatile, and that's a positive trait. It's a positive trait that has issues if done too much. However, for now, Yusei is a competent duelist, and tie that with his motivation and you've got a dynamic character. I'm reminded of Yugi back in the OG series, with his motivation to save his grandfather wasn't introduced in the first episode, but it was still a powerful motivator for the character, and one that a lot of people could relate to because, yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to help their family, especially someone who you really care about? Yusei has something similar, with Jack Atlas stealing his card and using his friend as bait to do it, and there's a nice tie-in to the original series that had the theme of friendship to be a key component in the narrative.
Doc Sinus.
Sorry, Jack, but like it or not, we have to be friends.
It adds a level of personability to the character and is something that is relatable. I'm sure most people watching this video have had something taken away from them or had their trust violated by someone they once considered a friend. Lord knows I have. Though I will say that unlike some anime protagonists who are overly brash or infallible, Yusei's reserved nature and focus on practical solutions ground him, allowing viewers to connect with his struggles and triumphs, though there are some issues with his stoic nature. He's also a leader, which is something that some stories do need to consider, as he's also the one to really bring the main cast of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's together and form a proper team and friendship amongst them. Yusei as a character does help his team come together, and even at times support them. And as a fun fact, if I'm correct, Yusei's name translates to save or to help. To me, these are all things you kinda need to have a little bit in your protagonists in order to make them a more positive leaning character, even if they're willing to break the rules in order to right the wrongs of the world. There's also an evolution of motivations too, though the primary motivation to get Stardust Dragon does get solved, a more important one crops up. You see, in order to coerce Yusei into a dueling tournament, the Fortune Cup, The major antagonist of the first half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, Rex Godwin, took Yusei's friends from Satellite captive. Yusei's goals shift to wanting to save them from getting just the Stardust Dragon and getting back at Jack. Stardust Dragon and revenge against Jack Atlas is put to the side. And I do need to point out that when Yusei first reached Neo Domino City, Jack was waiting for him and gave Yusei Stardust Dragon back.
Well, it certainly helped me when I got to New Domino City. And to show my thanks, you can have your precious dragon card back. Here, take it. I sure don't need it anymore.
Now that Stardust Dragon has fulfilled its purpose, Jack didn't really need the card anymore. But Yusei throws the card back, mainly because he wants to reclaim Stardust Dragon through a proper duel, not accepting it as a handout. Taking the card back without earning it would undermine his integrity and the bond he shares with his deck. And this moment underscores Yusei's character as a determined, principled, and focused on earning his victories. It also sets up the stake for the climactic duel later in the first season with Jack versus Yusei. Then, when the Fortune Cup is about to begin, Jack actually confronts Yusei to return Stardust Dragon.
何の用だ?
フォーチュンカップに出るそうだな。
なぜ知っている？
そんなことはどうでもいい。こいつを返しに来た。スターダストはお前が使ってこそ意味をなす。こいつを使い、あの夜の決着をつけろ。
Which, to give some context, early in the season, Yusei and Jack did duel. And even though that duel was interrupted by the arrival of a mysterious entity called the Crimson Dragon, Jack was set to lose that duel. Even if the public would never know about it, Jack would still know. Which is why he sought after Yusei to give his Stardust Dragon back. They made a deal and he lost. So even though Jack did scummy things, he was still a man of his word and returned Stardust Dragon, wanting to face Yusei again and get back his revenge. However, the thing is, Yusei here is that his motivation shifted and he had to change to what was really important to him, showing where his priorities actually do lie. Because he does use Stardust Dragon in the tournament, although he wouldn't use it until he faced against Aki Izayoi, since he still had some hangups about using Stardust after Jack returned it, but it's nothing too much. Yusei has focus and he knows what's important, which is something that you need for a protagonist. We could go over some more interesting stuff here, but if we did, we'd probably be looking at an essay that's about an hour long at this point, and we do need to talk about the negatives about Yusei's character writing. Well, this won't be fun. Normally when I talk about the negative aspects of a character in these videos, I normally don't have an issue of bringing up such negatives, which when you really think about it, every character needs to have their flaws. I know that there are some people out there who often say that if you complain about a character's flaws, you're not interested in flawed characters. The idea is that when a character does have the flaws, the main point of the story should be that said characters get over their flaws and improve as a person. That's the basic idea of a character arc, and it's a bare bones explanation of it because there are so many ways you can go about this. The problem is that sometimes those flaws can be a bit too much to the point where some people can find it hard to believe that some of these characters, they have such divisive opinions about them. This isn't to say these kinds of characters shouldn't exist. In fact, I relish it because the discussion about them can be fascinating. Now, I say this because of the whole, if these characters didn't have flaws, and that's kind of the issue I have with Yusei. This isn't me saying that Yusei is a Gary Stu, but the writing in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's does leave a lot to be desired with his characterization, because he does have a very few big flaws highlighted in the first season, and it's something that really isn't explored as the series goes on. And I want to save that one for the next section, but for one I want to focus on the issues that are smaller. Stoicism, the lack of a personal arc, and plot armor. Now, I've talked about Stoicism a few times on this channel, but if you're not familiar with the idea, it's basically a mindset that encourages people to focus on what they can control and accept what they cannot, leading to an emotional resilience and inner strength. But on a literary scale, people often associate Stoicism with restraint, rational decision-making, and a focus on virtue, sometimes remaining calm and composed in a lot of situations. Not that that's a bad thing, most of the time, but when it's a prominent character trait, a lot of people will associate the character with being emotionless. And while I certainly wouldn't consider Yusei to be emotionless, there are a lot of people out there who take issue with Yusei being stoic, because it can easily reduce a connection to the audience. It's a barrier since it can make the character feel predictable. This is highlighted in a duel against Kiryu, in which a Kiryu who is revived to become a Dark Signer, one of the major antagonists of the first season, is consumed by his hatred by the perceived betrayal that Yusei caused. Kiryu's got a ton of intense emotions like rage and despair, which fuel the duel's drama. Throw in the fact the last time Yusei dueled against the Dark Signer Kiryu, Yusei would have lost if it wasn't for his D-wheel crashing out. Meanwhile, Yusei, he's pretty much composed and willing to say things like, "I won't give up on you, Kiryu." This is noble, but it lacks a lot of raw emotion that could highlight this tense duel between former friends. And what sucks that after the first duel, Kiryu's appearance did actually shake Yusei. where he felt responsible for the death of someone he considered a friend, with Yusei legitimately scared of what he should do, that these emotions are causing him to doubt himself. And thanks to Jack, Yusei steeled his resolve with a busted up jaw. It's one of my favorite moments from 5d's since it has Yusei be at one of his most emotional moments. But I do find it weakens his duel against Kiryu a little bit since this is still a messed up thing that Yusei needs to do something to someone he actually cared about. So there should be a lot more emotion coming from the main character. Granted, this is one of the weaker issues I have since this can be more or less considered based on interpretation of yourself. And there are points where Yusei does break down too. In his duel against the Dark Signer Roman, due to some magical mumbo-jumbo, one of Yusei's friends, Rally, swaps places with the Dark Signer, having been absorbed by the dark energies for the Earthbound Immortals earlier and forced to duel against Yusei. Eventually, when the duel ends by sacrificing himself, Rally fades away, presumably dead, and Yusei cries out in pain. It's a more complicated situation with this critique because there's evidence for and against it, and hence why I'm saying it's probably the weakest of my complaints with Yusei. Still something I've noticed with him, but it's a very minor complaint. Then there's the bigger issue I have with Yusei as a character, and that's the lack of a personal arc. But Kamen, you just spent a good chunk in the positive section talking about the amazing motivation that Yusei had. You know, the one where Jack stole Stardust Dragon and Yusei had to chase him down? Thank you, Strawman. It's not like I wrote the script and you talking about that. What would I do without you? Get a lot less people complain about you and actually get an actual job? Highly doubtful about that. I will still maintain that Yusei's initial motivation is a great one. It's a good opening motivation for the story and the characters. However, as the story progresses, you tend to notice something. Most of Yusei's motivations are based on reactive elements, and there's not really a good internal ambition for the character. Let's go over some of the motivation. There's Jack stealing Stardust Dragon. Then, in order to get Yusei to join the Fortune Cup, his friends are captured and their safety is weighed over Yusei's head. The Dark Signers save the world, and in later arcs there's a similar thing going on. That's not to say you can't have reactive motivation. After all, someone's got to stop the big giant sludge monster from destroying the world, but there really isn't a lot of personal ambition. Yusei is more or less willing to do what he can for others, including his friends and even his home of Satellite. One of the prominent elements of Yusei's character is to showcase that just because you're from the Satellite, that doesn't mean you're trash. And that's great, but it's more of a wide sweeping goal for not just Yusei, but for everyone who's from Satellite. Yusei doesn't really have a personal goal, not even something small like getting a girlfriend. It would make sense, and he's ignoring the redhead who's putting out several signals that Yusei just seems to ignore. I joke, obviously, but if you look towards the other protagonists, even Yugioh, you can see that they have some goals aligned with what they're doing. Yuki Judai from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX wants to be the king of games, and that's a personal goal in his first couple of seasons until Season 3 happened with Judai merging with the main bad guy, Yubel, and that's a whole thing on its own. Or Yuya Sakaki from Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, a series that I have a lot of issues with, but he wants to follow his father's footsteps and become a great entertainment duelist. I'm not saying that reactive motivations are bad, since they do add to the selfless character trait that Yusei has, but there should be something that the character strives for himself, a personal dream that Yusei wants to fulfill, and it would make him a much more relatable character in that regard. And because of that lack, other characters in the same series have better motivations and stand out more. Jack Atlas being a prime example where he wants to reclaim his crown as king of the writing duelists, or Aki Izayoi struggles with her psychic powers and being alone. Hell, even Crow, who wants to provide support for the orphans he cares for, is rooted in more personal motivation since he knows exactly what growing up in Satellite as an orphan is like and he doesn't want the same thing to happen to these kids. I guess what I'm saying is that Yusei should be a little selfish for himself. I know that there's a stigma about being selfish, but much like anything, if done in moderation and with good intentions, it can be healthy. As it is, Yusei doesn't really have a character arc, and I think it does hurt his character since he doesn't have any personal goals. Well, unless you count Axel Synchro, but
best not to think about stuff.
But here's the biggest issue, and that's the plot armor in the duels. Now, I'm a huge fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duels, and 5d's as well. With Yusei, he's got some very creative ones. Hell, riding motorcycles while dueling is something I love. It's so absurd that it's entertaining.
Tristan, I'm going to regret asking this, but why do you have a motorbike? Because in the future, card games will be played on motorbikes. That is the stupidest thing that's ever come out of your mouth.
Still, there's an obvious issue with Yusei's duels, and that's the narrative invincibility that he has. It's a bit of a hard thing to talk about since to a degree every Yu-Gi-Oh protagonist has some level of plot armor, where they draw these super situational cards that would save them and then said cards would disappear into the ether. Yusei though has a bit of a worse streak with this. The writers want him to win, but they tend to pull victories out of their asses to make it work. Here's a few examples of why I think this way. And funnily enough, the first episode gives a great example.
But I've never relied on just one card before, and I don't plan on starting now.
2 seconds later.
I activate the trap card, Equip Shot!
The trap card Equip Shot is used with Yusei vs Yugioh, a member of Sector Security. This trap card allows you to take an equip card that is attached to a monster and re-equip it to another monster your opponent controls, and then the two monsters battle. It's not that great of a trap card, especially by today's standards, but it's even more situational when you consider that Speed World, a card that activates whenever a riding duel takes place, penalizes a player for using spells that aren't under the speed spell umbrella, and there are no equipped speed spells ever made. The card is extremely situational and not something that most duelists would actually play in their riding duel decks since there's a noticeable lack of equipped cards in riding duels. One can argue that if Yusei had faced against other members of Sector Security and they had similar decks to Yugioh, then it makes sense to include it because the monster Handcuffs Dragon equips to a monster upon its destruction. But unfortunately, we're never really shown that, and other members of Sector Security use more standardized decks, so that argument kind of falls flat. Still, that's the first episode, and it's not something that's out of the realm of possibility. I mean, Yugi managed to use Exodia to win against Kaiba back in the OG series, while using a deck that had no way to actually get all the pieces as fast as possible. But there are other cards. Like in the second duel against Aki Izayoi in episode 41, Yusei has an equipped card called Silver Wing that is just perfect for him to use with Stardust Dragon to prevent its destruction through battle, which was key to help throughout the duel with Aki using Black Rose Dragon to attack him. This is a bit more thematic though, so while I understand, it's still an example I want to give up. Probably one of the dumbest points of this is against Team Unicorn. Alright, so I need to paint a picture here and explain a few things. So the WRGP is a tournament where teams of 3 duelists go against each other. But there's a twist, it's a baton pass sort of situation. When one member of the team goes down, the next member continues on. The field is the same, the graveyards are shared, and the opponent's life points aren't reset. And Team Unicorn actually did something smart by having a casual duel with Team 5d's, misleading the protagonists into planning for a specific strategy, but when the actual tournament duel begins, they pull out a different deck and strategy to fight. Because of this, the first member of Team 5d's dueled here. Jack was basically manipulated and almost got the team disqualified, but managed to move his D-wheel to the point where he could allow the next member of 5d's to continue the match. That being Aki, who had nothing from Jack's match. Meanwhile, Team Unicorn had a field and had established strategy going on. She didn't do too well either, with most what she was able to do was set things up for Yusei by summoning his Stardust Dragon, but then it was 3v1 at this point, and Team Unicorn was actually planning for this too, coming up with another strategy when finally their first team member gets knocked out, and that's deck destruction. Team Unicorn planned this and was having their second teammate literally force Yusei to discard cards from his deck. Even though Yusei beats the second member, he only has 3 cards left when the last member of Team Unicorn, Jean, comes in fresh. And finally, Yusei runs out of cards. You don't lose until you're unable to draw cards, and Jean had destroyed Yusei's last-ditch effort to burn him and take the victory. All Jean needed to do was end his turn, and Team Unicorn would have won. But Jean decided to attack with his monster, and Yusei used a card to bump up the defenses of said monster and give recoil damage, with Yusei winning at the last minute. And the reason he attacked was Jean had fun with the duel and didn't want to win this way. This really sucks, because the writers had already set up a combo for how Yusei could have pulled a clutch victory, allowing for a last minute surprise. But then they go, Jean was smart enough to counter this, but dumb enough to attack anyways. You could have had this setup go of 2 ways. The first is Jean didn't see this coming and Yusei wins with the combo. The second is that even if Jean saw it coming, he didn't have a proper counter for it and he was left with no choice but to attack to win. You either get Jean losing by relying on a deck out instead of his own strength, or Yusei outplayed him and made it so his only choices were all led to defeat. Here, it just makes Jean into an idiot to allow Yusei to win. This Duel was actually pretty trash, save for Aki summoning Stardust Dragon. That was a hype moment, but that gets squandered when it's pretty much the only highlight for her as a riding duelist. It's pure plot armor to make Yusei win, and it's probably one of the worst examples in the entire series, which sucks because there's a lot you can do with this, but the plot armor and how the WGRP is written really hurts that, since there's a lot of reliance on Yusei, and it undermines the entire team aspect that the show is trying to push. These are really big flaws with Yusei as a character and his writing, and while they're different in severity, it does hurt him as a character and the overall show of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's to me. Yusei technically only lost one duel in the entire series. Other duels where he was going to lose were interrupted and couldn't really count as a loss to some degree. And I think that hurts his character too, but only highlighted more when the writers have to bend over backwards to help him win. But there's something else that I feel like needs to be discussed when it comes to Yusei that are related to the issues in this section, and that, my friends, is missed potential. This is going to be a bit of a shaky part, mainly because this gets into much more opinionated aspects of the video. Because when you talk about missed potential, it's ultimately going to be a bit of, I wish this is how things went instead. And yeah, I'll definitely admit that's going to be part of this section, but this isn't a means for me to say, I did this better, hire me Konami to write your stories, scrubs. It's more or less me as a fan wanting things to go differently based on what we're shown that was established earlier. For example, earlier in the second season we were shown a younger character named Sly who took interest in Stardust Dragon, but nothing was actually ever done with that. You could have had the kid use his friendship with Ruka and Rua as an excuse to get close to Yusei so he could steal the card, and thus had a bit of an interesting subversion with the core theme of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. The bonds between friends. Having a kid exploit that core value would be an interesting case, especially since it could lead to Yusei developing trust issues with Ruka and Rua, who could have facilitated the theft to happen in the first place. And this could lead to Yusei considering who he should trust with his friendship, because while trust is necessary for bonds to exist, there will be people who will exploit said trust, and those who didn't mean to hurt you as well. Now that's just a small example of missed potential, and how to really play with the bonds of characters in this show. Because don't get me wrong, Yu-Gi-Oh! Before and after 5d's was always about the bonds and friendship, but at times the series would actually play with those themes. Earlier this year we talked about Vector, a villain who basically abused the friendship and trust that Yuma Tsukumo had to fulfill his goals. If you want a better idea of what I'm talking about, well, I did make a video on Vector, go watch it. But for Yusei, there are two characters of potential that could have been done to at least make the themes of Bond be played with, and actually has to deal with the two characters in the later half of the series, that being Dark Glass / Bruno and the final antagonist, Zone. Though I will not be talking about Zone in this video. So, FYI, the second half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's is a bit of a clusterfuck, since there's a ton of plot lines and elements to it, and while I do plan on giving a summarization in this video to give you some idea of what I'm talking about, I know I can't do it justice in the limited time of this video. Who knows, if this video gets 5k likes, I'll make a video about Zone and go into more detail about the things I have to say. Since to really dive into that, Zone deserves his own video and critique. Okay, back to the regular video. In the second half of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, the main antagonists are essentially androids from an apocalyptic future, sent back in time to various points to prevent the tragedy that would engulf the world and doom it. And yes, my friends, card games destroyed the world. Bum, bum, boom! One of these androids was Dark Glass, who was sent back to challenge Yusei to learn a new form of synchro summoning, Axel Synchro, in order to make Yusei grow stronger and find an alternative to synchro summoning, which was the actual cause of humanity's destruction. However, when he first came back to the past, Dark Glass's memories were wiped, and he was found by a reformed Sector Security, where he was put in the care of Yusei, Jack, and Crow, under the given named Bruno. And although Bruno lost his personal memories, his technological know-how was still there, and he quickly became friends with Yusei, two gearheads becoming close friends with each other. You love to see it. Hell, Bruno was able to have Yusei drop his stoic guards and really relax, being himself. Eventually though, in the final arc, it's revealed that Bruno is Dark Glass and is a part of the main antagonist's group. Now, I am not saying what we got is bad. In fact, I do like how in the final duel between the two, Bruno is still trying to help Yusei, trying to teach him Delta Axel Synchro Summoning to help him against the final big bad of the series. However, I feel like there should have been more here. Now, there's a reason why I brought up Vector earlier, and even though obviously Zexo came out afterwards, there's something that you could play with the idea of bonds. and that's obviously trust. Bruno and Yusei became close friends, but it turns out that Bruno is actually a part of the same group that's been terrorizing Neo Domino for the past few months. I feel like you could have that revelation occur sometime sooner in the story, with Yusei having to combat his feelings of having to put so much trust in someone only to find out that they're in the same group as the antagonists. There should have been something there to really play with the idea of bonds and Yusei's trust. It's an element that's actually brought up a few times with Yusei. Plotline wise, the first was with Jack, who basically abused Yusei's friendship to fulfill his dreams, and later on with Kiryu, who felt like Yusei had betrayed him. Having something similar with Bruno/Dark Glass would have been a nice confliction for Yusei, since later on he would have to rely on Dark Glass and even confront him in a duel. To me, I think there could have been more done with the relationship. And while I do think you could make an interesting case with Zone, this isn't the video for that, because that's a video in and of itself. That's gonna be a long one. Ugh. I don't want the takeaway from this video to be that Yusei is a bad protagonist. He really isn't. There are plenty of times where the character shows emotions, and he does have a very big flaw that I want to go more in depth here, and that's where he views friendship as a duty. I'm bringing this up here to see how much people actually watch the video, because there's one factor I didn't bring up, and that's how Yusei's father was the cause of Zero Reverse, the event that basically destroyed Domino City and fractured it. Throw in the fact that Yusei is named after the Yusei Project, the development of momentum. It's a constant reminder to the Yusei of his father's actions. To make it clear though, it wasn't Dr. Fudo's fault that the Zero Reverse event happened. He just created the technology for it. But it's still something that weighs heavily on Yusei as a character. He feels guilty because of his father, and he feels pressured by the guilt, especially considering his two best friends, Crow and Jack, lost everything when Zero Reversed happened. And that also translates into Yusei helping people too. It's why Yusei will often throw himself into reckless actions. It's a form of atonement, and it's even more symbolic when you look at Stardust Dragon's effect, an effect that prevents the destruction of all other cards in the field at the sacrifice of itself, and it symbolizes Yusei greatly. And that's really deep, where it also has the symbolism of Yusei's card choices. However, the issue is that a lot of this gets overshadowed. There's a bit of a reputation of Yusei being a messiah in the fandom, something that the show itself goes into when it comes to Zone, which, again, 5k likes and you'll get that video, my friends. It's not helped by Yusei being mostly stoic for a good portion of his screen time, and the fact that the writers love to bend over backwards to make Yusei win with some of the weirdest deck inclusions. So don't get me wrong, those are issues with his character, and there is a preconceived notion for Yusei where he is a messiah and a Gary Stu because of these writing choices. But I personally don't believe that. I've gone through several elements of why Yusei doesn't fit that mold, but there are cracks in Yusei as a character. I love Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, much to the displeasure of people who want to gatekeep me from the series, but it's not perfect. There are a lot of things that hold it back, and its characters, but there's a lot in it that's amazing, especially for a series where the main focus is to sell you on these little cards. But a lot of the greater stuff, especially with the main antagonist of the second half, never really got a chance to shine in the West. Now you may be wondering why that is, because Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's never brought over that storyline, throwing all the censoring of themes, cutting out the darker moments, and even removing entire episodes. It hurt the international impact that it had. This isn't to say that 4Kids in the dub are all to blame. There are a ton of elements in the original Japanese that I have issues with. I think my videos demonstrate there are plenty of problems in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. But like I said, even with these faults, I love the series, and it's a series that has a lot to talk about, despite being made almost 2 decades ago at this point. I think we'll wrap it up here. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a comment with your thoughts. And if you don't, put in the comments, let's rev it up! To let me know you made it to this point in the video. If you enjoyed my content, don't forget to drop a like too. Remember, 5k and we'll talk about Zone. Doing that really does a great thing for the channel and tells me and YouTube that you enjoy this type of content and want to see more of it. But for now, I'm MangaKamen, and thank you for watching. And remember, my friends, ahead is the future we make ourselves. Let's keep riding, everyone, in this writing duel we call life. Writing duel, acceleration!
次は負けんぞ。
また全力を尽くそう。
Depending on the day and topic, I'd be willing to tell you that Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's is probably one of my favorite series in the Yu-Gi-Oh! franchise. Yeah, it has a lot of issues, something you guys should know if you've seen my channel. But don't let that dissuade you into thinking that I believe the series is nothing but bad things. Even aspects and characters that I dislike have positive traits, with potential that I believe was kinda squandered. That said, while I do love the series, it has its issues. I've been very vocal over the last few years about that, and today we're going to close the chapter on the character-based videos for Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, at least when it comes to the main cast, and we're going to be talking about the twins, Ruka and Rua.
Don't be scared, Luna. There's something powerful and terrifying down there, Leo. I can feel it. Right, but... I mean, I'll be with you, so that's good, right? No way! It's too scary! Let the record show Leo's courage lasted a whole 2 seconds.
Let's get this over with. I'm MangaKamen, and this is how to waste your characters. Obviously spoilers for Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. Side note, I am expecting you to have some inclination on what Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's is. I've made about 4 other videos talking about the series and the main cast, so if you want a refresher on this 17-year-old anime, it's not a crime to go check those out.
No way! She has a mark like mine!
Ruka and Rua are an interesting pair of characters in the narrative of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. Without having to repeat myself from other videos, the two are young siblings who are part of the group of signers. Technically. If you're a scrub who only uses the dub, it'd be Luna and Leo respectively, but in all honesty, those aren't bad names for dubs.
What are you doing on computer? Fall!
Don't they have last names? Nope. Pretty much any other member of the main cast that matters, Yusei Fudo, Jack Atlas, Aki Izayoi, Crow Hogan, has a last name. Ruka and Rua? Nope, nothing. Nada. There's nothing wrong with that per se, but it's really weird that two main characters don't even get the honor of a full name.
You get nothing!
Anyway, as for why I say they're technically both signers, you see, for most of the story of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's up until the last arc, the sister Ruka was actually the real signer of the two, with her brother Rua being a bit of a tag-along until the very end. And that's pretty much it. They have parents, but we never see them. They're well off because they live in the tops of Neo Domino City, and got involved in the plot after Yusei was tased like a dog escaping from sector security. No, not kidding. Oh, sure, the criminal market's turned into tracking dye, but we can totally have our main character get brutally tasered to the point where he loses his memory. Yes, that was a thing too.
So, who are you, mister? What's your name?
I have no idea.
That only lasted one episode, by the way. Dub only. The only other thing that's notable to bring up before we get into the more details is that Ruka has a connection to the spirit world. You see, back in the old days of Yu-Gi-Oh!, at least in some part, dual spirits were a thing. It wasn't fully established in the OG since a lot of the monsters summoned were extensions of human souls known as Ka and Ba. It wouldn't be until GX that the dual monster spirit thing would have a lot more established and be fleshed out in the plot, with a few of the main characters having their own dual spirits.
Don't you see it?
See what?
Oh, boss, you're the only one that can see me! Go away!
5d's did continue with this, with Ruka having connection with the dual monsters. Even at one point, when she was 3 years old, lapsed into a coma where her mind lived in the dual monster spirit world, being protected by her signer dragon, the ancient fairy dragon. Ever since, she's had a connection to the spirit world. Rua didn't have anything like that. Hell, we don't know much about the brothers' past. Now, before we actually get into my complaints with these two characters, the concept is actually pretty good. You have a pair of twins, one of which is a chosen one, destined to save the world. Top it off, they're both little kids who are 11 years old at the time of the first season. You have the grounds for a story where the non-chosen sibling can feel like he's being left out, with his sister having to face off against the dangers of the world. It's some stuff that could have the potential to be very interesting character writing. Hell, the fact that Rua wasn't a signer could make him feel left out from the rest of the cast, or how the bond he has with the sister could be strained because she got this destiny mark slapped onto her arm and he could be jealous because of it. But alas, that's not really what happened. Now, most people are probably expecting me to go, "Fuck you, Crow," about this, since when he was introduced, a fair bit of screen time was dedicated to him and his antics. And oftentimes there are people who do attribute some of the character writing issues to him. While I do agree somewhat, to say it is all Crow's fault would be disingenuous. But to say his inclusion into the series and main party didn't have an effect would just be as bad. He isn't the main reason why the twins had their writing issues though. Hey, before we continue on with this video, I want to say thank you guys for watching and clicking on this video. And it would mean a lot to me if you could subscribe and hit the notifications. YouTube has been kind of rough these past few months, and with me doing a lot of stuff, it would really mean a lot to me. Thank you for your time. Let's get to the actual video again. The twins have a fairly decent introduction, being the ones to help Yusei out after he got the security facility and him losing consciousness after being tasered up the ass. And then the Fortune Cup had some fun times with Rua dressing up as his sister to Duel, and then...
Now then, why don't we begin? Listen to my voice as I count them off. And 1.
God damn it. Either way, I found it interesting because during that duel, Rua had also gone quiet and comatose, which hinted at a connection to the spirit world. And that's really cool because it hints that there's more to the two since it affected Rua as well. It's even led to a time where the Arcadia movement, a group of psychic duelists who have another signer, Aki, with them, taking an interest in the twins, which in turn led to Rua having a duel against the leader Divine to see if he had any weird abilities like his sister. He didn't, but it was something that did put the two through some hard times, especially since they were trying to get the signers to come together in a united fashion. This is relatively all good, since the two are trying to be proactive as best they can as kids, and getting exposed to the harsh realities of the real world, so to speak. Hell, during the preemptive meeting before the signers face off against the dark signers, Rua came to the harsh fact that he's not a signer, and that if he goes with his sister and the rest of the group, that he'd only get in the way, only for Ruka to tell him that he made a promise to protect her since that's what brothers do. It's interesting and plays with the dynamic of a sibling relationship that Yugioh really hasn't had before, with twins, and one of them being a chosen one. The problems start to arise when we get to their actual confrontation with the Dark Signers, with one of the biggest issues being this guy, D-Mac. There is nothing about this guy. No, I am serious.
Who are you, and what's your purpose?
He's just a bum that the Dark Signers just picked up off the street and had him go after the twins.
That's it?
Well, only if you watch the show. The Yu-Gi-Oh! 10th Anniversary animation book explained that D-Mac was a part of a cult that worshipped demons and was reborn as a Dark Signer after he was sacrificed to the Earthbound gods. But you know my rules on this channel. If you have to explain this in outside material, it might as well not count.
Comes to Danny Phantom. You, me, Butch Hartman, have said that the ghosts are not really ghosts, but monsters from another dimension.
And it sucks, because if you look at the other Dark Signers and who they face, there's at least a personal connection that had to give the Dark Signers an actual motivation. Kiryu hated Yusei for what he perceived to be betrayal. Carly was killed and forced to fight against Jack Atlas, the two's relationship being a key element to the fight. Misty was under the assumption that Aki was the one who had gotten her little brother killed, and the moment she learned that Divine was the one behind it, she tried to end the duel before she got possessed. My point is that the rest of the Signer duels had these personal touches to them that made them all unique to each other in one way or another. But with D-Mac, most you can say is the guy really liked his monkeys, and it sucks because he has so many other questions surrounding the guy, like how in the hell did he get his hands on Ruka's Signer Dragon, Ancient Fairy Dragon? He apparently has the ability to interact with the spirit world. How'd he pull that off? What sucks is pretty much every other Dark Signer had their backstory fleshed out and had a personal connection with the Signers, but with D-Mac and the twins, nope, he's pretty much a generic bad guy. That being said, the duel at least had some narrative strength to it, since Ruka had been transported to the Duel Monster Spirit Realm, with Rua taking over the duel against D-Mac, ending with the two coming together to win against the evil bad guy number 50. It's not terrible, but considering the other signers who had a personal connection to their opponents to some degree or another, it feels cheap, and a missed opportunity to at least have the two's past be fleshed out like the others were. Normally, this is the time where I would make a suggestion on how to fix this, though there are a few ideas I have, but imagine instead of a rando hobo, the Dark Signer was Rua and Ruka's father. I would have had the parents basically break up after Ruka's month-long coma, the father becoming obsessed with the spirit world after he held his daughter's hand and saw a vision of that world. The man would become obsessed, at first trying to help his daughter, but then the obsession would devour him, and when he may have found some way to save his daughter, Ruka would wake up, meaning all his hard work would have gone to waste. Throughout his frantic research, he distanced himself from the mother, who after seeing the husband had freaked out over the good news that his daughter had awoken, would obviously file for divorce and take the children away. Throw in the fact that during this time, the father could have discovered that the ancient fairy dragon had a connection to Ruka's coma, and bam! Not only do you have a personal connection to the duel, and one that's unique, but you also flesh out the backstory for the twins' family and make the duel actually a lot more dramatic since it's their family. Granted, you could also do the same thing with the mother, but I'm kind of just spitballing here with the ideas. After this duel, both Ruka and Rua become cheerleaders for the rest of the series, and then... In my Crow video, I talked about how making him into a signer was a bit of a faux pas on my end. Not only because it ruined the idea you don't need to be a chosen one to be a winner, but it actively threw a monkey wrench in all the foreshadowing that Rua was supposed to be a signer. Look of Power Tool Dragon gave him in the duel against Divine, the vision showing a more organic version of Power Tool Dragon, and the end credits showing that dragon. Though for the sake of me not repeating myself, we'll talk about that issue later and even make a suggestion that could have worked. But when we get to the second season, both Rua and Ruka are effectively benched. They're barely above being background characters, and let's look towards their dueling records. After their duel with DMAC, Ruka and Rua don't have a proper duel until episode 70, with Rua dueling against a ghost? Okay, that's a little random. Then 7 episodes later, they duel together against one of the 3 antagonists of the second half, Luciano of Iliaster, one of the pure 3 nobles. I haven't really talked about these 3 in my videos, since while there are some interesting things about them as villains, my thoughts on them are divisive if I'm being charitable on the best of days. They do have sick designs and their concepts are interesting. Oh god, I just realized that for this video I'm going to explain their quirk. That's a problem for future comment. Right now, let's talk about this duel in the episode. Luciano comes to Duel Academy that Ruka and Rua are enrolled in under the guise of a transfer student, and does what he can to inject himself in the small friend circle that Ruka has. Rua is just basically a tag-along most of the time. Luciano gets close to the Ruka, and Rua, being the overprotective brother, doesn't like that. Even more so when Luciano gives Ruka a duel board. Now, if you thought card games on motorcycles were odd, card games on skateboards are extreme!
How long is this gonna go on?
Point is, now the twins are capable of riding duels, since they are effectively D-wheels on a skateboard. Sounds pretty cool, right? The twins were obviously left out of the concept of speed dueling, which is a pretty big part of the series. Hell, even Aki managed to get her license.
Oi!
I'm okay. Eugene, it's a stop sign. I'm okay.
And hey, she did manage to duel on her D-wheel. Twice. Before she was injured and didn't have an actual duel until 40 episodes later. So, having the twins being able to compete in the main gimmick of the series and against one of the major antagonists in this sounds like a pretty good, yeah, this is the only riding duel that the two are in the entire show for. And they lose to Luciano. And they technically don't face off against him again. But technically they do. It's confusing, but whatever. They lose this duel, and they never duel again on these D boards. In fact, the next time they duel, it's about 53 episodes later, and it's alongside Jack Atlas. Let me put this in perspective. Rua has had 7 duels where we actually get to see the duel play out. Ruka has 4. And to point out, 3 of these duels for each of them are when the two are actually dueling together. Ruka has only 1 solo duel, and half of that was her being brainwashed. This isn't me saying that a character's worth is determined by how many duels they have in a series, but it's clear that both Ruka and Rua are severely underdeveloped characters. Ruka's role as a signer is just basically a glorified title, since she barely participates in any important duels, so far as not even being allowed to duel on her own. And Rua? Well... he fucking dies! Well, almost. In a duel against Aporia, which, to make a long story short, is the true form of all 3 of the pure 3 nobles of Iliaster, devices were attached to the other duelist's body, and if they lose the duel, the devices would pierce their hearts and kill them! Bum bum bum! I can see why the dub didn't want to translate that.
It's best not to think about stuff.
Rua at one point pulls off a move where he essentially sacrifices himself in order to give the team up a chance to fight back, and then... Yep. Rua becomes a signer. Did a good job, I'm proud of you. Did a good job, celebrate the good times. Yeah, as you can tell, I don't really care. This is supposed to be his most significant moment in the show, Rua gaining his true signer dragon and becoming a signer at the same time. But it comes in too late and feels super rushed. It really lacks the build-up that it needed to be impactful. This is mostly because these two have become more or less background characters. The second season is focused on the WRGP, a grand tournament that I complain about more times than I have about Crow, for crying out loud. Because of this, the main trio of Yusei, Jack, and Crow essentially steal all the limelight because of how the tournament is set up. which is a quick refresher, each match has the teams competing against each other in continuous matches, where when one duelist loses, the next team member jumps in and continues to face the same opponent. This is a terrible choice to do this, since it means that each match can take several episodes to get through them, with the runtime being eaten up by the main 3. As you can probably tell, I'm not a huge fan of this choice in writing for 5d's. It really sucks because you could have had some interesting ideas with both Rua and Ruka as characters because of their premise. If only there was something that actually fleshed out this concept and You know, for a channel called MangaKamen, it's a crime I don't really talk about manga all that much on here, but oh well!
Sir, when you speak, all I hear is the sound of cities burning, nightmares crying, and dog shit wearing deodorant. You are a poor excuse for a sentient being.
Fun fact, there are manga adaptations of some of the later Yu-Gi-Oh series, all the way to Arc 5, and just saying that brings back the terrible memories!
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
But if it's any consolation, the manga adaptations are mostly alternative universes that don't typically follow the same storyline as the anime. Hell, the 5d's manga gives me a dream come true with Aki about to smack the living hell out of Crow. Plus, hey, it's got some really rad ideas to it. Just look at this badass skeleton knight. Now, why am I bringing this up, you may ask? Well, it's because Ruka and Rua are in the manga and are given distinctly different roles. The two actually start out as antagonists, both of them being abandoned at a young age, and in order to survive, they had to compete in riding duels, and they were good at it. I question how two youngsters would be able to get their hands on a D-wheel, but I digress.
It's a fictional product. It doesn't matter.
The two were eventually scouted by the manga version of Rex Godwin to become elite eliminators to weed out weak duelists in a tournament, and determine who was capable of controlling the powerful dual dragon cards that are established in the manga. Immediately, you've got a much more dynamic narrative weight with them being active antagonists and participating in riding duels and fighting against Yusei and giving him a run for his money. This duel is also narratively important to the plot since it ties directly into the dual dragon mythology and Yusei's own personal plot to save his friend. The twins are more proactive in the plot and they aren't passive. In addition, the manga actually plays around with their concepts. In the manga, Ruka has a condition that requires expensive medicine, forcing Rua to take on a harsh life that molded his personality into a cold and hateful one. It adds to the protective nature that Rua has, while also having a tragic reflection showing how harsh the world is considering that this kid, this young, has to compete in order to help his sister. Meanwhile, Ruka? Well, in the plot, after she receives her own dual dragon, Ancient Pixie Dragon, she becomes influenced by the card, becoming a bit threatening and commanding, even threatening Rua if he allows her monsters to be destroyed in a duel. She even takes over the duel from Rua against Yusei when Rua breaks free from his own dual dragon's influence. Their characters actually have more narrative weight with a tragic backstory. It ties them to the core conflict of the manga and into the broader themes of survival and redemption that the manga has going for it. It's not perfect. Hell, the manga is essentially the Yusei and Jack show, but at the very least, the manga did allow the twins to have some more proactive roles. Typically when I talk about the issues I have with characters and ideas and how to fix them, I don't like to think it's the be-all end-all. It's mostly just for fun. So let's do it here! I already brought up how to fix the Dark Signer issue earlier in the video, but how would you be able to fix Season 2 Ruka and Rua? Well, let's bring up the idea I had. Really, the big issue was when Crow got his signer mark. In the Crow video, I think that if Crow and Rua weren't signers, you could have had the two form a close friendship, almost brotherly, over the fact that despite that their friends and families are signers, that didn't make them lesser. They managed to help take down the Dark Signers. They were both badasses without that mark on them. Another suggestion would be that Rua and Ruka could share the Mark of the Dragon. What I mean is that since we're shown multiple times that the Marks of the Dragon can transfer between users, the biggest is when Rex Goodwin had his own mark transfer to Yusei, and Crow got the tail from Yusei. That sounded dirtier than I thought. Anyway, we also see that when the marks combine to one and appear on the backs of Yusei and Jack, so why couldn't the same thing be done between Ruka and Rua? It could solidify their sibling bond, and the two could try training to exchange the marks so they could be more effective. Other ideas are that the two could actually play on them being twins and work on strategies that could have a lot more synergy with them. The only other twins that we've had in Yu-Gi-Oh that I can think of are...
Again!
Notify!
You're next of kin! You're trapped! And the doors are all locked! Ha! Hoo-ah! You face the brothers! Paradox!
And while the Duelist Kingdom arc was on crack with the rules, the two still had teamwork and had synergy with their decks, so something similar should have at least been considered with Ruka and Rua, at least when they do tag duels. These are just suggestions for how I think that could have improved the two and maybe actually not have them be pushed to the sidelines so much. I have my issues with the twins, but I don't think they're terrible characters. It's just that they're mostly ignored and not given a lot of thought before pushed to the side. I've always stated that one of the biggest issues of Yugioh is the bloated cast that almost each and every series seems to have, and 5d's is no exception. It's not like you can't have big casts and still be effective with your storytelling and character writing, but when it comes to Yugioh, honestly the only series that I'd say did it better was Zexal.
Does this shock you?
No, I'm cool.
And even then, I still have my issues with that series, but that doesn't mean there aren't great things about Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's. Sure, there are a lot of issues, and most of them are about the second season, but I still love the series. And who knows? With the last character video done about this series, I might be planning on a full-on video where I discuss the entirety of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's, at least doing one season at a time. I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! 5d's has a lot of potential to talk about, and I think that going over the series as a whole would be a good thing, especially since we've covered a lot of the character stuff here, and I think it would be impressive to basically talk about the series individually. I don't know. After all, it's a weird concept that you have a card game on motorcycles, which is goofy, but then you have such things as classism, bigotry, isolation, torture, and other mature themes that a lot of people don't give the series credit for because of that stupid damn joke. So, I'm making you guys a deal. This video gets 3K likes, I'll put that video on the docket. Comment, dual boards are useless, that'll help push the video and get more likes. Until then, I'm MangaKamen, and remember to keep your D wheels clean. Later! Well, if you made it to this point in the video, I want to thank you all for your time and patience. Like I said in the beginning, I've got a few big videos planned and I intend on making some really good content in the fall. So, once again, I hope to see you guys on the channel, and I hope you keep making great content for you guys to come. And I hope to keep making great content for you to enjoy for years to come. And while we're doing a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Based content, I hope you can enjoy that and what else I have up my sleeves. Thanks for watching. MangaKamen, out.